Yeah,
And
I think it'd be good maybe since we don't have much time to try to just talk about the stuff that's most new.
sure, I have it up on Perception of Indian Philosophy, page 17, like you said.
Yeah, yeah. Um, my goodness, this coffee is not helping me at all. I think I'm going to be coughing a lot, but
Sorry,
we'll
man.
see. Um, maybe you can talk more than me. Also, talking makes me start
I don't know
coughing.
if I
So,
have as much as insight, but yeah,
um,
I can read for sure.
I mean, one thing that's kind of interesting to talk about, I think the most interesting thing to talk about here is the relationship between language and concepts and perception,
Yes, I would
right?
like to talk about that. You've
That
mentioned this many times, that the issues of language in philosophy, and let's talk about that. What do you notice there?
um, well, I mean, basically, the debate comes down to whether we can ever have completely unmediated perception.
Right.
Unmediated meaning that we don't. Is it possible ever to perceive in such a way that you don't, as they would say, superimpose concepts or superimpose grouping?
Yes.
You know about Gestalt principles? Is that something you've heard of?
I know the word gestalt, but
What does that word mean to you?
I mean the gestalt is like the isn't it the total like the total sum in a sense essence?
Well, it's not nearly as metaphysical as that. Gestalt psychology was a movement that I think more or less, well, it didn't exactly begin in the 1920s. Actually, it has a background at least in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, but they don't really acknowledge their indebtedness to Kant. Essentially, in the 1920s in Germany, there were a number of psychologists that were studying perception, and in particular, different ways in which the mind immediately um, uh, takes perception and forms it into objects. In other words, forms it into perceptual groups. A gestalt
Okay.
is just a perceptual group.
Okay.
Let me share my screen because I'm going to just
Sure.
show you some examples of this kind of thing. I hadn't, excuse me, prepared this, but hopefully I can find a few good one. Gestalt principles, maybe. Oh God, I don't know what I'm gonna find here. What the? Well, this is not so bad. Yeah, maybe I'll just do this one here. Open image, new tab. Where is that? There it is. Okay. Well, it's kind of small, but hopefully you can see a few things.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay. So this gives you a few ideas. Maybe this is like the most significant one, right? What we have are, for instance, in this case, we've got a figure and a background.
Uh-huh.
And what's interesting about it is that, like on the non-conceptualist view, maybe like the view from Yogācāra or whatever, what we would have would be actually not even three distinct shapes, but in any case, maybe at a kind of intermediate level, they would grant that what we have are three distinct shapes here,
Yeah.
but that's not really sufficient to describe the perception of it because we also see a triangle.
Yeah, right.
And it has to do with, uh, in this case, they're calling it reification, but this has to do with the reification is actually a compound principle. I think what we've got is something more like good continuation, although in a negative sense. Good continuation is, maybe I can find this. Let's see. Good continuation, Gestalt, and I wish I had prepared this because I've got much better examples like on other
No, it's
computers and
great. I love
stuff.
this.
But let's see if I can find that one. Well, this is going to be good enough, I guess. Maybe over email I'll send you some. Oh, actually, maybe on my OneDrive I might have a better example here. Let's see if I've got it. Oops.
Is it that your mind fills in the rest of the image in this sense?
Well, yes, there are different principles. Essentially, that's right. So here's a good one. Yeah. Okay. This is my favorite example. Now, what this is an example of the
That
Gestalt.
is really funny.
This is an example of the Gestalt principle of good continuation.
Yeah.
Now, why do you see that? Now, at least empirically, based on, induction, you've never seen a giraffe dog like this before. So you assume conceptually that it can't possibly be a giraffe dog. And yet, in the perception, you see it that way. In fact, you can't not see it that way.
Right.
Right?
It's funny.
So why is that? Well, it has to do with the similarity
Yes.
of these two shapes on either side of this obstruction,
Yeah.
right? That those other examples here is essentially the same thing. It's just that the figure and the ground are reversed,
Mm-hmm.
right? So here, the reason that you see a sphere
Mm-hmm.
is because it's still good continuation. It's just that what's being grouped through continuation is the background,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? But in any case, right, so like a couple of things can be drawn from this that are relevant for the discussion today. One significant thing is the distinction between what you might take to be actual reality and what is sometimes called empirical reality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the difference between, say, ontological reality and empirical reality is as follows. Ontological reality would be what you would appeal to argue that can't possibly be a single dog,
Okay.
right? Because and there in this case it would just be inductive. I mean, I guess conceptually there's it doesn't
Based on
contradict
experience.
it doesn't contradict the definition of dog, that a
Yeah.
dog has a long neck, because you don't usually invoke the length of a neck when you define dog or whatever.
Yeah.
But in any case, if you're a realist about, say, perception or about knowledge, what that means is that inductively, through just experience over time, you form a belief that there are no dogs like this.
Yeah.
And then if you then form the further belief that corresponds to reality,
Mm-hmm.
that it's not just that I think there aren't dogs like this. It's like, no, actually, I really think that there are no dogs like this
Right.
that exist.
It's not that I just haven't seen the dogs in Africa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be maybe an example where you're appealing or maybe making a claim about what ontologically really is the case or is not the case.
Yeah.
Now, you can hold that in your mind, and also at the same time hold in your mind the fact that you can't help but see it
Yeah.
as connected,
Right.
right? Even though you don't believe that that's really the case,
Yeah.
it is really the case with respect to how you have to experience it.
Yeah. Right. It's bringing up the possibility of this dog.
Well, it's not just that it's bringing up the possibility, it's that it's not false to say that you see this as a connected
No.
object, a connected
Right. Okay.
thing,
Got it.
right? I mean, another way to do it, let's see if I have more examples of this kind of thing with pareidolia. Oh, these windows. I always forget how to spell this. Yeah, there it is. No, looks like I lost it. Just a second. What's this one? Oh, I don't even know what I'm getting here. What the?
Oh,
That's
wow.
weird. That's not what I want. I probably have better ones here somewhere. What's this one? Yeah, okay, here's a good one. Now,
Pumpkin moon. It's pumpkin sun.
yeah, so pareidolia is the specific name for the phenomenon of seeing a face in often random stimuli.
Yeah, clouds or whatever.
But they're not totally random. I mean, you have to have, like, if I have a dot here and a dot here and a line, it doesn't matter, the details of the configuration don't matter as long as you have two dots in some configuration above a line.
Yeah.
You'll see it as a face.
Yeah.
Now, again, right, it's not that you excuse me, believe that there's actually a floating pumpkin face in the sky, but with respect to how you have to experience it,
Yeah.
it is real,
Yeah.
right? So empirical reality
Huh.
means that um, there are sort of fixed aspects of perception that are real.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't necessarily ontologically real in the sense of being an object out there, independently of how
Yes.
you perceive them.
Yes.
But with respect to how you have to perceive the world,
Yeah.
they
It
are
is an
real.
experience you're having.
Yeah, exactly. And there are lots of examples of this. I mean, like a rainbow is a very textbook example of this. Rainbows do not exist ontologically.
Huh.
They don't. They don't.
It's just our perception.
It's the particular way that the eye refracts the light waves that are reflected through water droplets in the sky.
Got you. Okay.
Right. Yeah, you can look this up. This is like the most textbook example, the rainbow. In fact, there's lots of like poems about this.
Yeah. Okay.
Unweaving the rainbow is a phrase that often is taken to describe. So, like in the debate between Enlightenment and Romanticism,
Uh-huh.
one problem that the Romantics have with, say, the Newtonian picture or the Enlightenment picture is that it's constantly trying to unweave the rainbow.
Okay.
And what that means is reduce the particularity and, in fact, reality of subjective experience to purely mechanical, objective terms.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Right? So, like, if you think that, for instance, this is like what we were talking about with psychologism, right? The
Mm-hmm.
fallacy of
Yeah.
psychologism. Psychologism would be a position that holds that all these things that we think are distinctly human and distinctly meaningful in human experience, like love or rainbows or whatever,
Yeah.
actually can simply be reduced to purely physical, mechanical
Right.
entities. And this idea of, say, like seeing a rainbow, for instance, or feeling love or something like this, there is a kind of illusion to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not ontologically there in reality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so,
But we also can't ignore that we see it.
well, that's right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, to the extent that they are real, this actually gets into a fairly complicated domain in the philosophy of mind, which would require like lots and lots of additional hours to explore. But one way of looking at it is that okay, so you take like subjectivity and objectivity, and then you can also apply the distinction of, say, like epistemology and ontology.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say, for instance, that I'm trying to figure out if there's a shortcut way for me to do this without talking for like another 15 minutes. But it's essentially like if something is ontologically objective, it means it's really out there independent of whether you know it or see it or anything like that.
Yeah.
And if there's exactly one thing that we know about in the universe that has subjective ontology, and that's consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right, which is to say that if you could always, for instance, give an ontologically objective account of what it means to see a rainbow by talking about light waves and refraction and neurons firing and all this kind of stuff. And that would be an account of the objective ontology of all that. But that objective ontology is distinct from the subjective ontology of actually seeing a rainbow.
Yes.
Right. So that's the distinction there. And back to the phrase of unweaving the rainbow. Unweaving the rainbow means trying to reduce subjective ontology, the subjective ontology of consciousness, to an objective ontology, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things you'll find if you ever get steeped in philosophy of mind is that the basic arguments and positions are more or less identical to what they're doing here in ancient India or ancient Greece. It's just that, um, the the techniques have become more mathematical and more,
Yeah. They fleshed it
rigorous.
out.
But with respect to how well we understand consciousness, we're basically in the same place that we were 5,000 years ago.
Well, and it's interesting because this whole journey that I've been doing with you guys, like discussing, Indian and Buddhist philosophy, is all about the same stuff. Again, this is one of the this is one of the coolest things, realizations I've come from. It's just no matter where you're living in the world, the great thinkers that decide to engage in this kind of thought and put it down in some sort of way that we can understand it centuries later, it just shows how similar the human race is, no matter all our differences,
Yeah,
perceived differences.
yeah.
And there's subtle differences, but they're trying to tackle the same issues. That's what and
Yeah,
they're doing it in sophisticated ways that are not that dissimilar from each other in some regards.
that's true. That's true. I think that there are a few respects in which philosophy progresses, but a typical complaint about philosophy is that it's hard to point up any um, progress that is endemic to philosophy itself, instead of simply a function of applying different new technologies or different new, say, mathematical approaches or whatever to philosophy. But the basic questions, um, we haven't made very much progress on answering the basic questions. It's just what has progressed is the way we try to answer them, or the way that we frame the question and whatnot. But I think that itself is significant, and I think also is a really good kind of thermometer, or measuring, a way to measure the change in culture and the change in basic assumptions and this kind of thing over history. In any case, let's get back to
Sure, sure.
perception. Okay, so I hope it's kind of clear more or less what I mean when I say like Gestalt principles.
Okay,
It
yes.
is, there are a bunch of them, but the basic idea is that human perception has essentially baked into it these strategies for
Hmm.
object formation,
Yeah, okay.
right?
And
Like,
how we
yeah,
perceive and how we group things, how we
exactly. Yeah, so
yeah.
that's what I mean by that. And so then back to the question about whether it's ever possible to get to, hello.
Breakfast
What?
has arrived. Thank you
Oh,
guys.
good. Wow, lucky man. Whether it's ever, whether it's, excuse me, ever possible to truly get beneath, or to get beneath that aspect of perception,
Yes.
that grouping aspect. Now, a couple things that could be said about this. Terms like concept, when we
Uh-huh.
talk about like, is there such a thing as non-conceptual perception? The problem is that the word concept has lots of different meanings, and people aren't really clear that they might be using it in multiply different ways, or
Hmm.
that when I claim that there is no non-conceptual perception, and then you claim, what are you talking about? I can see a thing whether or not I know the name of it or whatever. We're using the word concept differently there.
Hmm.
And so, we could try to define what it means to have non conceptual perception. Like, um, one thing we might want to say is, um, we often use the word concept interchangeably with name. So, for
Hmm.
instance, if I say, okay, that's a blue cup that I'm holding up
Right.
here, my beautiful blue cup.
Blue is the
Um,
concept, blue is the name.
exactly right. So, like, to the extent that it is true or adequate or appropriate to call that thing blue or a cup or whatever,
Yeah.
um, it's because it's an instance of a concept, blueness,
Uh-huh.
an instance
Right.
of a concept, cupness. Um, but there, one thing that you might be seeing is that the way I'm using the word concept is actually um, identical to something like denotation. In other words, I am using a name, a word, to pick out a particular object. right? As
Yep.
a blue thing, as a cup, as this kind of thing. And that's
Right.
actually distinct from other ways of using the word concept, which might be a little bit more abstract, but you might um, define
Like the
concept.
concept of gestalt.
Yes, even that would be similar to using a name. It's not the
Okay.
concept of Gestalt, but rather the Gestalt principles themselves are concepts. They're conceptual. That's another
Hmm.
way that people talk about them. Like one thing that a concept does is that it's kind of like a labor saving device.
Hmm.
So, in other words, instead of, um, let's say that I want to talk about a dog, but I don't have the name dog. And then I just try to like, maybe I don't even have any words. What I try to do is like get you to feel all the different like tactile sensations you can get from a dog and like everything that you see and everything that it smells like or whatever. And then what I try to do is gather that all together
Hmm.
into a group, essentially, right? Which and that group is that thing that I'm now going to apply the name dog to, right? But that actual principle of grouping is often described as conceptual.
And so when you were talking about the rainbow principle that people apply, or how did you put it? That could be one of these concepts, for example, that quickly brings people to an understanding of what we're talking about without having it to the granular level.
Yeah, well, maybe another way of saying this is that, okay, let's say that we agree that you can call this thing a blue cup. Why is it that it is appropriate to put a name on, this particular grouping of sensations?
Uh huh.
Right. In other words, what you're seeing right now, what you're taking in is a bunch of stuff.
Hmm.
I have to use words to describe it, but my hand, my face, my cup.
Sure. Sure.
Um, and we can give all these different parts of the visual field names,
Yeah.
right? That's a cup. Why? Well, it fits the concept cup. But
Right.
beneath that question is, how do you know that cup picks this thing out and not this thing?
Uh huh.
Right? And there you have to say, oh, well, because perceptually I'm grouping it in
Yes.
such a way that this part of the visual field needs a name and this part of the visual
Yeah.
field needs a name, right?
Hmm.
And that aspect of grouping such that it is then appropriate to name something or such that this part of my visual field can receive a name.
Yeah. It's useful.
Well, what I'm trying to point up simply is um, conceptualization is often used also to refer to just that basic level of grouping within the visual field, such
Yeah.
that you can call that thing a door and that thing
Hmm.
a light and this thing a face,
Right.
even though it's
That's
all part of the same visual field.
yes. Yes. I get it. Yeah. And that's a Gestalt principle in a way. Like these.
Exactly right, exactly right.
Yeah.
So that conceptualization, all the Gestalt principles actually are just um, uh, different facets of conceptualization itself.
Uh huh.
And then you add names to the objects that you have
Right.
conceptualized in that
Hmm.
perceptual way, right? And so the problem, however, is that very often people will use the word concept and simply mean name. It's like
Hmm.
if I say, well, this is a cup, and then you could say, well, why do you call that a cup? It's because culturally, you have been indoctrinated into a society that has things like cups or
Hmm.
whatever. Or, the point
Right.
being that there's something kind of arbitrary to calling this a cup versus maybe, excuse me, either some other name or, it's kind of like what we were saying with the idea of a pot versus a blue pot, right? Like the idea that uh, why is it that we in the West talk about pots and then some of those pots are blue pots? Couldn't we just talk about the class of all blue pots as a particular kind of object that's a
Ah,
different
right.
kind of object from a red pot or something like that?
Well, and I remember when I studied a little bit of philosophy way back as a 16-year-old in a class that we were talking about how many different words the Inuit have for snow, stuff that we
Mm-hmm.
don't even have. So they might have 27 different like degradation,
Yeah, yeah.
kinds of
Divisions,
snow.
distinctions,
Yeah,
right? Sure.
yeah. And was this Hopper? Was it a was there a or trying to
Well,
remember his
well,
name.
the That is usually invoked
Whorf, whorf,
yeah,
something.
Sapir-Whorf.
Safer whorf
Two
hypothesis.
people
Yeah.
were, yeah, Sapir and Whorf. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So anyway, the point, however, is that we have to distinguish between two uses of the word concept here.
Okay.
So the fact that we only have one concept, in other words, we only have one name, snow, but say the Inuit have 30 names
Yeah.
for different things that they, might even sort of perceive as significantly different kinds of objects, or
Yes.
significantly different objects, even if they're of the same kind, whatever. That there's a distinction between names and the actual principle of being able to form this kind of thing that I call one name of snow and this kind of thing that I call a different name that
Right.
we translate to snow. It's not that there's necessarily a distinction between the actual perceptual well, it's more complicated than what I'm going to say, but at the very least, when I say that the Inuit have 30 different names for snow, that doesn't immediately imply that they have 30 different ways of experiencing objects where we only have one way of experiencing the
Right.
object, because
Right.
we can learn to recognize those different
Yes.
things and maybe come up with we could come up with 30 different names if we wanted, right? The point is that there's this sort of sublinguistic aspect of conceptualization, which simply means the ability to form perceptual groups.
Yes. Right. I'm getting it. Yes.
Okay, so that gets a little bit confusing then in the discussion about whether perception can ever be non-conceptual.
And I think I was confused at that in some of this article. Yes.
Yeah,
Some of the
so
book.
you really have to distinguish between non-conceptual perception understood as not constantly trying to apply names to your perception
Okay.
versus non-conceptual perception that would hold that it's possible to perceive without forming any groups whatsoever.
Okay.
Is it clear what the distinction is
I
there?
think so. Yeah.
Um, I yeah, it's fairly hard to think of what it would mean to perceive without that basic level of grouping.
Grouping, because that's what our brain does.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, it's kind of automatic, and it's also
Yeah.
empirically real in the sense that it's a real phenomenon in our experience.
Yeah.
And presumably, if there are a lot of traditions that hold that, not just in Buddhism, but also in Western traditions that hold that a particular sort of enlightenment or particular sort of aesthetic experience involves just experiencing the things directly without any kind of conceptualization whatsoever. But I'm not sure that it's possible to perceive things without grouping them. You can sense things without grouping them,
Did
but perception
Yeah.
involves sensation plus awareness of sensation.
Do they believe though, like, that you get to a meditative state, and while I've meditated, there's been better meditations than worse meditations. I don't think I've ever got to this state, but there's been better times where I've been able to diffuse my level of like awareness of what's going on more towards something that's just like experiential and not focused on whatever passing thoughts. Let's say I've had moments and glimpses of that. And so it seems to me like part of this is through their practice. I don't remember what's making me think this particularly in the exact reading.
Well. In Yogācāra,
Yeah.
one of the traditions in Yogācāra, they have this no mind doctrine
Yes.
or no mind ideal, maybe.
Is that where they get this, you think? Or they
Well, there are quite a few actually. There are quite a few different traditions, some of which are really kind of uh, uh, antithetical to each other, that hold a basic ideal as the point of salvation, the point of liberation. Like even say the Nyāyas or the Samkhyas or whatever that are realists that hold that when we truly perceive that there's a cup on my table, it's not just part of the conscious illusion, but rather there really is a cup independently of me on the table. They still hold that the point of liberation is to achieve pure selfhood. And pure selfhood, as we've pointed out, is distinct from consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, pure selfhood is also a sort of non-conceptual being in the world, or non-even conscious being in the world, which I'm not sure exactly what that means. It's like pure agency, but without the capacity to actually do anything.
Is this the
Right?
Atman?
That's right. So the point is that both the Atman schools, the
Yeah.
Orthodox Hindu schools, and the Anatman schools, the
Yeah.
Buddhist schools, and so on, they both see the end point of liberation, or maybe not the end point of liberation, but at least some sort of significant domain of liberated consciousness or liberated being as this sort of pure, the Samkhya's call it pure witness consciousness.
Yeah.
And that is actually not really that different from the no mind.
Yeah, that's right. That's how I always kind of try to relate to it.
I mean, I guess I'll say it this way. Ontologically, there's a pretty big difference. Either the Atman exists or it doesn't exist. But with respect to the phenomenology of it, having completely empty consciousness. So consciousness, I guess, I'm not even sure what that means. It seems like it's a paradoxical term because
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it means to be conscious and yet have that consciousness be of nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one way that this has been pointed up is to say, what's the difference between being conscious of nothing and not being conscious?
Yeah, right.
Right? Because
Unconscious.
it seems like ontologically there's a pretty big difference, because consciousness still exists even if it's empty versus not existing at all. But
Right. No, exactly. It's like something's more active in that definition, even though it's not very active. Something's more active and something's more like denied.
well, I'm not sure that ideally it is active in either situation. I think the point of like pure witness consciousness, Atman, pure Atman, even though it exists, it is inert, right? It is not active, right? Because it no longer, it has been freed of sensation, it has been freed of embodiment, it has been freed of consciousness,
Yeah.
and it still exists as like this pure substratum of being or something.
Yeah.
But it's not active, right? It's
what I meant is the way we phrase that, the difference between the difference between it's like somebody has reached this state actively.
I think
Yeah.
what excuse me, what you're pointing up though, I think is not so much a distinction about whether it's active or not, it's about whether it exists or not.
Okay.
Right, and existence is odd because just because it is exist is normally a verb, to be is normally a verb, we think that it is involved in activity understood as maybe a cause and effect relationship or something like that. But I don't think that that's the idea in pure Atman. I think it's like just this pure return to absolute being, but not being of something or other, just like pure being or something. Whereas the Buddhists disagree that anything like that really exists. I mean, they don't exactly deny that. To a certain extent, that pure Atman, return to Brahman and everything, is just sort of like a different way of describing absolute interconnected being.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
They just see it as another lens on reality.
And it really, one way of describing this from the Science of Logic by the German philosopher Hegel is at the very beginning of that, he's talking about, imagine pure being, not being of anything in particular, but just pure being, empty, indeterminate being in itself. Essentially what that is something like an empty container. I mean, there is, something exists, but it's not even correct. Existence, being, I can't even say something exists. I just have to say exists, right? But there is no substance to that. It's just like the pure field of existence.
Sure.
And then he points up that that is, um, we might say something like co-referential, or it kind of picks out the exact same thing as the concept nothing.
Mm-hmm.
In other
Okay.
words, if I think just pure nothingness,
Mm-hmm.
in the very fact that that's a thought,
Mm-hmm.
there is like an empty container there, but there's nothing to it.
Mm-hmm.
But the same thing is true of pure being,
Mm-hmm.
right? That pure being is also exists,
It's an
but there's,
infinite empty field.
yeah, exactly right, right. And what is different is the aspect. I
Mm-hmm.
suppose maybe like you could call it the perspective that you take to that.
Yeah.
But from the idea of being, you can immediately infer the idea of nothing, and from the idea of nothing, you can immediately infer the idea of being,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then he has this whole way of spinning out how these things come together. If you're able to think both being and nothing as a unity, then you get becoming, which is like change and growth and all this kind of stuff. That's how
Yeah,
he,
and the pre-Socratics were dealing with this as well. This concept, they had a very, what I would say, kind of, in my mind, clunky way of thinking about it, let's say. But it was,
yeah.
for them, they were arguing, it was the, I forget the word, a particular strain of them.
Well,
Anyway,
let's not worry about them
okay, all
now
right,
because
go
we're
ahead.
talking about Buddhists. Like I only brought up Hegel to kind of point up that you get a very similar kind of thing in the debate over Atman and Anatman, right?
Okay,
Like because like pure Atman is like yes, it's this field of potential or this field of being without any being anything in particular.
mm-hmm.
It's like this pure absolute universal being in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's yet it is distinct because you are claiming that that exists.
Yes,
An Atman claims it doesn't exist. An Atman claims that being is something more like the white part of this sphere here. you
yeah,
know, it's the relationship itself, independent of the
right,
things that are in relationship. But
it's all Dharma.
but the point is that they're both pointing up something like a limit and an empty um, uh, expanse within the limit,
Yeah, that's
right?
right.
Um, and they take sort of different perspectives on that.
Yeah,
But
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
now, so there is a distinction. But I guess if it were phenomenally right from the point of view of what it's like to reach pure Atman or what it's like to reach no mind or something like this, I I don't think it would be any different.
Any different than
Well, I don't
both
think
approaches?
those are supposed to be antithetical approaches,
Yeah,
right? Pure Atman is something that the defenders of
yeah.
no mind don't believe in.
I think that's right. I think they both experience or both believe in nirvana as a similar experience,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps, but they describe the nature of what's really going on, the nature of reality differently.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you know, these sorts of this is actually a place that I think bringing in some analytic philosophy is kind of useful. So the German philosopher Gottlob Frege talks about the difference between sense and reference.
Okay.
Sense is essentially, like I'll just say, it's like the name we give things,
Okay.
and reference is what those names pick out in the world. So, like for instance, there's this, and then I say my blue cup,
Uh-huh.
and my blue cup picks out this object. My blue cup is like a name,
Uh-huh.
and what it picks out is this thing that I'm holding. Of
Yeah.
course, I could choose a different name. Like I could choose to say the cylindrical object on my desk,
Mm-hmm.
and that picks out exactly the same thing. But you
Mm-hmm.
don't know immediately from saying the cylindrical object on my desk that
Yeah.
it's this, right?
Yeah.
Here's a more straightforward example. Lois Lane knows that Superman is strong, and she knows that Clark Kent is not strong.
Yeah.
She doesn't know that they're the same person.
Yeah.
And so the point is that even though those two names pick out exactly the same thing,
Right.
Because of the nature of the names and what they seem to imply and how we understand them and so on, they actually motivate different kinds of behavior,
Hmm.
right? In other words, like how does she act towards Superman versus how does she act towards
Hmm.
Clark Kent, even though it's exactly the same person,
Hmm.
there are all sorts of different, in her case, behaviors. But if you were to blow that up to like a social, cultural level, all sorts of different practices, all sorts of different
Oh,
norms
for
and
sure.
whatever would come out of the different understandings of the same thing.
But the president of our college was just describing something to me yesterday that she went to some event, and then somebody was like, "And who are you?" And she's like, and then they were like, "Oh, so nice to meet you." Like they changed on a dime.
Right. Okay. Okay. So the point is that even though pure Atman and no self or no empty mind or whatever might really just be picking out the same thing
Hmm.
because of the way that they're named, the way
Hmm.
that they're conceptualized, the way they're understood, not just
Sure.
on an individual, but like on a completely cultural, societal
Yes.
level.
Right.
They are going, most likely at least, maybe not necessarily, but they are it's pretty plausible that they're going to motivate different types of activity in the world.
Yes, that's right. And
Right.
that's
And
why we have the
so,
different traditions, right?
exactly right. And different moral norms, all sorts of things like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not that oh, you people, you're just picking out the same thing, and so you don't realize that you're actually in agreement. Because the way that they pick it out, the names they give it, the ways they understand it,
Hmm.
actually motivate different ways of being in the world,
Sure.
right?
How they
Um,
organize themselves. Yes. Right.
yeah,
How they
and
think
so
about things.
that is a place where being able to pick out philosophical distinctions,
Hmm.
even though uh, ultimately it ends up describing the same state of affairs in the world, but the
Hmm.
way that they're described,
Hmm.
the arguments you give, are
Hmm.
going to be really, really different
Hmm.
depending on how it's done.
Sure.
And so I think that's how you have to understand those points of agreement that nonetheless motivate different types of religious practices, different types of moral
Sure.
norms, all this kind of stuff,
Yeah,
right?
no, good. Good point.
Um, okay, we don't have much time, so
I'm
what I
sorry
would
about
say.
that, by the way. I didn't know that this would all happen with my family.
Oh, that's all right. I don't think we can get through everything, but back to the maybe the most central question, like whether it is actually possible ever to have absolutely non-conceptual experience,
Yeah, right.
understood here now as experience without forming any groups whatsoever.
Yeah.
Um,
And without consciousness, is that basically as well?
well, I think probably the Buddhists, like yoga. I think it's Yogācāra. One thing I've noticed is that like the way that people pronounce any vowel that comes after a C, they always put an
It's
H in there. So it's like
chara.
Yogācāra, I guess, maybe.
Yogacara.
But in any case,
I always said Yogācāra in my mind. Yeah.
well, that's how they transliterate. But in any case,
Yeah.
you know, uh, I guess they would hold that those that aspect of perceptual grouping isn't ultimately real in an
Hmm.
ontological sense,
Hmm.
um, but it's possible to nonetheless um, kind of like switch it off and still keep perception. Like it's
Hmm.
possible to switch off that constant grouping
Hmm.
without switching off perception altogether.
Okay.
That I think is the claim, and that is the no mind, empty mind kind of situation.
That to me seems just mind-boggling, actually.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's possible, right? I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of people have argued that at that point you simply are no longer conscious. You might
Yeah.
still be perceiving, or not, I'm sorry, you might still be sensing things. Like your
Yeah.
eyes are still taking in data, light waves or whatever. Maybe even your neurons are firing in such a way that something is being registered, but it's not being formed into an aware conscious state.
Yeah.
And that's why the aspect of awareness is also a point of contention
Yeah.
among these different schools. And I actually can't keep everything straight. I don't remember that some of the schools think that it's possible to have perception without awareness.
Wow.
And some people think that it's impossible to have perception without awareness because perception means sensation plus awareness.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, right. And we're not talking about casual ways that people say, bring your awareness to this in a meditative group, you know.
well, here awareness just means the capacity to take a stand on sensation,
Yeah.
or the capacity to know that you are experiencing something. Right. So like the argument for the separability of Atman from consciousness was that you can think about consciousness. Right. And so that means you're aware of being conscious.
Yeah.
Right. And so awareness is meant here simply as like a second order perception of your perception.
Does this relate at all in your mind to some people's accounts of near-death experiences?
I
Where
don't know.
maybe,
You fill me in on that.
well, I don't. I'm just trying to make some sort of connection and trying to understand things. But some people will, you know, like, so we're talking about unconsciousness. So then my mind goes to a coma-like state, you know, or you're nearing death where you're losing consciousness, let's say. And then some people come back from that and they describe a white light, you know, that's just like blank empty field. And yet they seem aware of it. But at the moment that they're experiencing it, how would we think about it? You know, I don't know.
Well, I mean, if in a coma you're still having something like dreams, then you still have awareness. You might not be able to report that to other people, but it doesn't matter. You're still having it, right?
Yeah.
The point is that it I don't know. I mean, I've done meditating too, and I have often felt that I've gotten, at least very briefly, to kind of a point where I'm aware of, I don't know how to describe it, like the empty container of consciousness without any
Yeah.
particular thought.
Yeah.
And that's very hard to hold on to, right?
Very hard.
But
Yeah.
but the other thing is that if I were able to maintain it for long enough, I'm not sure that in that period I would actually even be conscious,
Yeah.
right? Or aware or whatever, or perceiving anything. So it's fairly hard to say whether it is a coherent idea. But
Because you kind of melt away at that point. Like there's something that melts away about your awareness. As it I don't know how to describe these things, and I haven't really achieved it except maybe a glimpse of it. You know, at a moment. But at that moment it's qualitatively different than the rest of the meditative experience.
let me maybe give you a couple more Gestalt examples that might be a experiential defense for the idea that you can get to a kind of unconceptualized perception. I don't know if these will work. These work usually really well in a group of people because usually about 50% of people can form the image immediately and 50% can't.
Yeah,
So
I've had those experiences.
with only
Yeah.
one person, I don't know, maybe you'll be able to form these groups or not. But let me just try a couple things here. Okay. Let's start with some easy ones, maybe. Oh, shoot. Here we go. Okay. So here's an abstract image.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
I see a kind of giraffe with a funny head in a way at the top.
Yeah, right. Okay, so you see the giraffe here. What's interesting is this one in a group of people, a lot of people won't see it until you say the word giraffe, and then suddenly they see it.
Yeah.
Which is an example of going from a kind of ungrouped perception to a grouped perception precisely because you invoke the name of the concept. But
Sure.
there are other harder ones. Here's a harder one. What do you see here?
Oh wow. If I squint. Yeah.
This one is actually too hard, and so you don't get the kind of magic trick. But
Yeah.
what if I say Dalmatian sniffing the ground?
Oh. I'm trying to find its nose.
The nose is right here.
Yeah, okay. Now I'm kind of seeing it. That's its eye. Yeah. I don't see it as sniffing. Maybe just I see it at a profile now, but
Well, but its nose is to the ground, and that's what
okay.
dogs are doing when their nose is at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
ground.
okay. Yeah, that is harder to see.
Okay, yeah, that one's too hard, and you don't get the.
But I mean, the longer you stare at it, the more, and as soon as you say,
Here's maybe a better one. As I said, this works better in a group of people. If
yeah,
you're the one person who immediately sees everything, then it's no good. But how about this one?
whoa. What do I see?
Yeah,
I mean, I see like an aerial shot of a
a
stadium.
city. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna now say squadron of fighter jets.
Squadron of fighter jets.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm
Maybe
not
I'll
seeing
zoom in a
that.
little bit for you. If I can.
Squadron of fighter jets. I'm not seeing them. Unless there's this little spot over here that seems weird. Oh, wow, they're there.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
And one of the things that's kind of interesting about this is maybe you would have found them without me saying that, but now that you know what to look for,
Yeah.
you know how to organize the image, they
Yeah, they're
suddenly pop out.
qualitatively different.
Well,
Yeah.
it just suddenly pops out, right? But
Yeah.
think about it's not as good as those examples where you take what seems like a random image, a totally chaotic, ungrouped image, and
Yeah.
then suddenly see a giraffe or whatever. But this does kind of maybe get you to an awareness of how we do leverage concepts on our experience in order to make sense of it, and
Well, yeah, and they talk about the rope and the
but
snake
that
almost.
that point before the fighter jets popped out was
Yeah.
kind of like maybe ungrouped, unconceptualized perception.
Mhm.
Perhaps, even though in this case it's not great because you did group it into a city, right?
Yeah, sure.
Um, but maybe I'll
Well,
turn.
they talk about the again and again in the chapter. They talk about the rope and the snake, and is it a rope? Is it a snake? And what is it like when you see a rope in the dark and think it's a snake? And
Yeah. So one thing that is significant here with respect to illusion and error in perception is uh, the difference between an experience of versus an experience as,
hmm
right? So an experience of a thing is different from the experience of that thing as something, right? In other
yes,
words, like, you know, for some people, the first image is a bunch of splotches, and then you say giraffe, and suddenly now it's not just an experience of splotches, it's an experience as a giraffe, or those
yes,
splotches as a giraffe, right?
right.
And um, the idea is that with like Nyāya, for instance, error creeps in at the point of conceptualization,
Yeah,
right? Like you can be wrong that that rope is a snake, but you can't be wrong that you see something,
yeah.
is kind of the idea. Um, okay, well, maybe let's just kind of go through the outline and stop wherever anything doesn't make sense or is interesting. Does that
Yeah,
work?
it was great to talk to you yesterday about Gestalt theory
Yeah,
and all of that. I'm going to get that back down to it was page 17, I think we were on.
that's correct.
Yeah, so we'll just kind of finish this up, I think. Where do you think we're at? We were kind of,
Well,
we
we
were on a
jumped
very
around a
interesting
lot. I
talk,
mean, I
but
went straight for the meat of everything. There are a few things that are interesting towards the beginning. I mean,
okay, sure.
one thing that is significant, I guess, is that one thing that everybody agrees on is that perception is a pramana. I
Mhm.
guess Nagarjuna might not agree with that, but you know the Yogacara schools, the Azteca, Orthodox Hindu schools all agree that at the least perception is something that can possibly give knowledge.
hmm
And with the Yogacaras, it's I suppose because uh, they defend a sort of idealism. Is it clear when they're talking about idealism what that means?
I mean, tell me what you're thinking.
Oh, well, idealism is a philosophical term that has to do with uh, the relationship between perception and reality, usually, or thought and reality,
Sure.
right? So, like, it's often taken to be um, the opposite of either materialism or realism, right?
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, yeah, okay, so maybe that's clear, right?
Yeah.
That if I say that uh, I can be sure of exactly one thing, that I'm having an experience, and I can't be sure of anything else,
Hmm.
then that already sort of puts me in the idealist side of things.
Hmm.
If I then go further and say, because that's all I can be sure of, that is all that I think exists, then I'm
Hmm.
a strong idealist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they even invoke solipsism.
Mm.
And is it clear what solipsism is?
No, but I've heard the
Well,
term. I haven't.
solipsism is even stronger than strong idealism, right? So,
Isn't it
um,
a thing where you get into circular reasoning a little bit? Is that a solid?
no, the SOL, it means like alone, I think, in
Okay.
solipsism. Basically, solipsism. So if idealism holds that all you can be sure of is that you're having experience, and so the external world might exist or might not. If strong idealism is that only thought exists,
Hmm.
it still holds open the possibility of other minds,
Hmm.
because all you're saying is that thought is real,
Hmm.
whether or not the material world is real. Solipsism holds that all that is real is my own mind,
Mm. Oh.
right? So solipsism is pretty much the strongest form of idealism.
Mm.
And so pretty much nobody ever wants to defend solipsism. For whatever
It's
reason, even
rude.
though if you're going to be like a hard liner on the reasoning of what you can be certain about, it does seem to follow that if all you can be certain about is your own mental activity, then it certainly doesn't rule out that your mental activity is all that exists, and every
Yeah.
other person out there, every other mind is just part of your mental activity.
Yeah.
So it is kind of a slippery slope once you start to deny the external world. What's going to
Yeah.
stop you from denying that other people exist?
Right.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah, so, but one thing that's interesting there is even in that, you still have to accept that perception is real,
Yeah.
right? It's like the Cartesian thing where you can doubt everything except for your own doubting.
Yeah, I think therefore I am. I was reading about Descartes a little bit that that's the one thing he could be, I mean, very certain of, that's where he started, I guess.
Yeah, and so that's I think why uh, they all agree that perception, at the very least, you know, gives you something. Whether
Right.
I mean, there's actually a question. It's kind of interesting because this is also related to what we said about. I think it was it was the Nyayas who
Hmm.
hold that you've got perception that is independent of concepts or independent of language,
Hmm.
names, and that kind of thing, and then you've got perception as things, right? So
Hmm.
like when I see the rope and it's a rope, I'm still seeing it as something, as
Hmm.
opposed to perceiving the world without necessarily taking it to be something,
Hmm.
right? And they say that the only place that error comes in is when you start to conceptualize,
Hmm.
right? Um, one thing that's sort of interesting to ask is if you're at the point of just sort of like bare perception
Hmm.
without concepts, everybody agrees that you can't be wrong about that,
Hmm.
but they very often make the leap that you can also be right about it. In other words, this is maybe a kind of complicated idea, but in the 60s, there was a philosopher who was sort of in the pragmatist tradition. Pragmatism basically is a tradition that wants to naturalize philosophy to a large degree, which means like treat human activity as a kind of biological coping in the world and this kind of thing.
Very
As
practical, very pragmatic.
exactly, yeah. And he was also very closely aligned to this idea of speech as a kind of activity instead
Hmm.
of as like the expression of some kind of timeless truth or some kind of impartial
Hmm.
view on the world. And he basically raised the question about whether you can ever get certainty at all.
Hmm.
And one reason why we might think that you can't get certainty, at least from perception, is if you think of perception as just like causal, as just something that happens in a chain of cause and effect, that activity isn't the sort of thing that gives reasons. You can then do the next step. You can take the next step and start talking about your perception. Start
Hmm.
making reasons.
And inferring, yeah, right.
Well, or performing the following behavior,
Hmm.
talking in such a way that other people take it to be inferences or
Hmm.
reasons or whatever. But that's distinct from perception, right?
Hmm.
It's a different sort of activity. And basically, the summary of that is while everybody, including Descartes and so on, seem to think that you can't be wrong about their perception, there's no
Hmm.
reason to think that you can be right because it's not the sort of thing about which you can be right or
Yeah,
wrong.
it's just what's happening.
Exactly.
It's not right or
It's
wrong.
not reasoning. It's just
Yeah.
like a causal thing.
Yeah, right. Got it.
And that's not a position that anybody here seems to be defending. Even the people that are maybe a little bit more skeptical about the external world or whatever still think that perception is a pramana. I mean, maybe
Uh-huh.
Nagarjuna would be a little bit closer to that because he wants to um, uh, levy skeptical arguments against everything,
Yeah.
all positions. But by the time you get to Yogācāra, it seems like they're kind of done with that and they want to for one thing, present a positive position generally.
Uh-huh. Right.
Um, but then they still want to keep the sort of element of unattachment, questioning, and so on. And I think that that's what leads them to idealism.
Mm.
Um, but
Mm.
yeah, perception seems to be one thing that we can't get rid of in
Mm-hmm.
our experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking yesterday. I was going last time was just yesterday. About where does consciousness come in with perception? There's the physical realm that we were just talking about now, maybe in a slightly different way. But then there's the way we categorize or name it, think about it, order it, perceive it with consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And we were trying to talk about, right, a little bit whether there can be not I forget how you put it, but non-consciousness, I suppose.
Well, yes, no mind, maybe. That's the
Yeah.
way that it's described in Yogācāra.
Yeah, and how we would know, how we could actually reach that and know it
Yeah,
at the same moment.
how you could be aware of an empty
Yeah,
consciousness.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what it kind of reminded me of also since you're talking about insomnia is
Okay.
how you never know, you can never see the or experience the moment that you fall asleep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah, you just
I
drift
have a
off.
couple times in my life tried to do that, and either I don't fall asleep at all, or
Yeah.
um, I wake up and it's like, oh, I fell asleep. But it's sort of interesting the way that you move from. I typically just think. I can sometimes tell the moment that I'm passing over into dream because I wake out of like
Yes.
I'll be having thoughts and then I'll have a thought that isn't really totally like rational or something,
Yeah.
and then I'll catch that.
Yeah.
Um,
Or when they put you under, for an operation.
oh
I
man,
never.
that's even
It's weirder.
that's weirder because it's so immediate
And
and
also you're
dramatic.
just like, okay, you're like count backwards, and then you're just like, what? You wake up 2 hours later, and it's done.
I've only had anesthetic like that once. It was in January, and they didn't ask me to count, but it was just like I remember just feeling kind of relaxed, and then the next second they were like I was back in another room, and
Yeah,
it's just
I
like
know.
yeah, it's just, oh okay. But I wonder if I wonder if the meditative state is like trying to just like coast on that threshold for as long as possible.
Mm.
I'm not sure because yeah, and I'd be interested to read a little bit more about like sleep research and stuff because like as I said, if I have noticed the threshold of sleep, it's where I've noticed certain thoughts creep in that don't really make sense or that are dreamlike in some sense, right?
Yeah.
And then I don't go full into the dream. I just kind of
Hmm.
pull back or whatever. And
Well,
so
and
maybe,
recently when I've had insomnia, this has just happened this week. I got up. I usually get up if I'm sitting there in bed. I get so like I get tired of it. Say after 45 minutes or whatever, I'll get up and I'll go downstairs and read. And then usually that can often after an hour or something, I can fall asleep on the couch. But like a couple days ago, I did that, and then I was in this weird state where it doesn't happen often in my dreaming, but I was convinced it wasn't a dream. I was convinced that I was experiencing these real things in the living room. So
hmm
it's kind of almost like a lucid dream. I don't know if that's exactly the term for it,
hmm
but I was
sounds
convinced
like a
that Julian,
hallucination.
yeah, it was like more of like a hallucination than a lucid dream. Like I was convinced that Julian had come downstairs and said, "Hi, Baba," but I couldn't quite wake myself up. But
Yeah.
it was a very weird like awareness of myself doing what I was doing, and also in unreality at the same time.
Yeah. It is interesting though that in all of that dreaming included, I guess none of that is empty mind anyway because there are thoughts and images and all this kind of
Yeah,
stuff, right?
yeah.
But it is kind of interesting, um, you know, uh, I'm also just kind of interested in the relationship between dreaming and sleep and memory, and like how
Mm.
hard it is to remember your dreams.
Hmm.
Even like even if you remember them really well when you first wake up, it's like 10 minutes later with your kind of normal waking thought
Hmm.
creeping in, it's suddenly hard to remember,
Hmm.
you
People
know?
say who do a lot of dream therapy that I've talked to, they say that when you write them down, you get practiced at it, you remember more and more. That somehow the habit
Yeah, I
establishes
have
that.
done that for the last 30 years or so.
Oh wow, have you noticed a difference then?
Um, I don't know. The thing is that the hardest part about it is, for whatever reason, when I wake up, I usually have a very low desire to write them down. It's like it's
Mm,
not even
yeah,
sort of like, oh, I should write this down or whatever. It's like when I wake up, I really, really desperately don't want to write them down, and I start
yeah.
thinking about it. It's a weird sort of thing. Unless
And they
it's
can
like a
escape you as soon as you started writing it. It's like, do the facts change?
well, uh, n-
It's hard
yeah,
to capsulize.
we should okay. We should just read Freud's interpretation of dreams to flesh out that conversation because we're like way far away from what we're talking about right now. I what I will say is this. I mean, it's um, a lot of things are hard about writing down dreams. For one thing, it's actually for me anyway. My dreams are mostly imagistic. I mean, there are things that happen and people say things, but like what I mostly like to capture is the image part of it. But the thing is that images all happen simultaneously and
Mm.
language is linear.
Yeah, it's
And
really
so
hard. Right.
just there, it's hard to actually capture it in that medium. Also, uh, you constantly with dreams, things show up with a meaning that's not apparent in the
Yeah.
image itself.
Yeah.
And so you always have to write about what it meant to you or how it
Yeah.
felt
Yeah.
or
So it's
what,
really hard to capture it. Hmm.
even if you're describing like a dog with six legs, when you say, but it was actually a dead sailor
Yeah. Right.
or something, right, is that kind of thing that's hard. And then the other thing that's hard is trying to avoid making it make sense, trying to avoid
Yeah.
filling in gaps in a
Yeah.
story and those kind of
Into
things.
your sense of what it could mean or
Yeah,
what
because
it means.
I think maybe part of what feels like you're forgetting your dreams is maybe the possibility, at least, that the dreams have gaps in them. Not in the sense of like there are like, like
Yeah.
shots in a film, although sometimes it's like that, but more like you don't have to have a kind of logical
It's
continuity
not
between
linear. Yeah. It's not
dreams,
logical.
right? And so when you're writing it down, it's very easy to want to infer that X, Y, or Z happened in between things or because of things, or
Yeah, that's right.
this or
Right.
that motivated what you dreamed,
Right.
but
And then you're
actually
just
you might
making
not have dreamed
leaps.
that.
It's not exact fit, and it would be so interesting if we could somehow video record and go back and view what we experienced.
Yeah.
It would be so interesting. Of course, we can't, but to
Yeah.
review that, like what happened.
Well, maybe we can tie this back into Indian perception.
They did talk about dreaming at one point a
Well,
while
what
ago.
what I would like to talk about next, which is just on the outline, which I think is actually pretty interesting, is to talk about different conceptions of um, sensation or perception as to whether it's active or passive,
Mm,
right? Because this is one thing that actually a lot of, I think maybe even most of the traditions here have an idea that perception is basically an activity that we do to the
right.
world, right? Instead of a fairly typical idea, I suppose, which is that, you know, we are just sort of passive receptors. Our senses are passive receptors where, light waves come in and we just sort of receive them, or sounds come in and we just kind of receive them.
Yeah.
Most of these traditions have this idea. Even some of them think that they're like beams that come out
Yeah, that the light comes
of the
from
eye.
within us and out towards the world. And yes, I remember reading that.
Yeah, and so I mean, to the extent that that has anything to do with dreams, the thing about dreams when you're seeing these images is you're constructing them, you're creating the images yourself, right? Even without stimulus at all. Perception is a little bit different because there is, presumably, if there is an external world, there's a stimulus that is built into the construction.
Mhm,
But still, there's this idea that perception is essentially active. It's an
mhm,
activity where we are creating the world in
mhm,
our perception of it.
mhm.
Um, and he does make a false claim, which is kind of unfortunate. If he had known more about Western philosophy or ancient philosophy, he might have brought this up. Actually, in the West, there has until the Middle Ages been that has actually been the dominant theory of sight. That in fact, actually, even in German, you have the word Augenlicht, which means it means eyesight, but it literally means eye light.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And there's this idea that down here, um, and I don't see it anymore. Um, oh, yeah, where I wrote parallels in Western antiquity. Plato, Plotinus, and a number of the Neoplatonists, Euclid, Ptolemy, all had the same basic idea that sight is like this reaching out into the world and
Right.
and and
Well, and that would have
actively
been so
engaging with the
important,
world.
when language developed. I mean, not like our modern world where you can just turn on a light all day long or whatever, all night long. But like, wow, I mean, you were really in the dark. I mean, I can understand why human beings would want to strongly use this. I mean, maybe of course they can understand that something's an external source of light, but strongly they strongly associate light to put on such a different meaning than it does today. I feel
Yeah.
like it
What
was
what
such an essential meaning to survival and to the
what
formation.
light? What are you saying?
Yeah, like what I'm trying to say is that so many things we take for granted now. This is
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
my idea. So many things that we take for granted now, like I can just turn on this light, big deal, it's a light.
Hmm.
Back when, you know, eons ago, as
Hmm.
humans were walking around making civilization, light, fire, all this stuff, it was really not probably taken for granted like we take it for granted now. And
Yeah.
so some of those concepts, I think, were really salient in their mind about how they might have described the world or
Yeah.
come to it with
I
language.
mean, I'm not sure why the fact that you can't just turn on a light would necessarily lead to the idea that seeing is like a beam that you send out from yourself onto the external world.
Yeah, I'm not articulating it very well. I think it's just that the importance of, I think the importance of light. What I'm trying to say, it's maybe not a very important thought here, but the importance of light, how salient it was for their survival, how important it was
Uh-huh.
for for human civilization in ways that we can't even think about now. We don't even think about it.
Hmm.
Really, typically, we just, oh, turn on the light. You know,
Yeah, maybe. I take it that it, first of all, if I whatever I'm going to say is probably just factually and historically false, but I take it may have something more to do with how central you think the human person is in the
ah,
cosmos.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. I mean, I think that like if you think that perception is passive, then to a certain extent you're saying you're an object just like everything else.
Yes, yes, yes.
Whereas if you say that you enlighten the world in perceiving it, there's
Yeah.
almost a kind of like deification of
Yes.
the basic
Yeah,
act
no,
of
that's a good
seeing
point.
here or
Yeah.
something.
Right.
Um, and that certainly fits, like in the distinction between Plato and Aristotle, that would sort of fit because Aristotle was much more of a materialist, much more of a down to earth kind of quote unquote scientific empirical thinker. And
Uh-huh.
he holds that seeing is passive.
Uh-huh.
He also holds that, you know, everything that exists, including humans, is a combination of matter and form, basically, essentially. Whereas as Plato holds that we are essentially spirit,
Mm-hmm.
this kind of thing. And I think that that might be something that motivates that idea that
Sure.
perception or understanding the world, and if perception enables you to understand the world, that's a kind of um, way of spiritualizing the world
Mm-hmm.
so that it's not
Yeah.
just a bunch of stupid, objects that have no
Right.
consciousness or anything. The world is taken to be meaningful,
Right.
and
I
I
guess my
suppose,
leap was, I totally agree with you. I think that's right. That's an astute point. I think it's natural for me to see how they would take something as important as light and put it into the human realm of like, we are doing this important thing. I guess that the importance of
yeah,
light
yeah,
itself is also more
yeah,
important at the time.
yeah. I think I do also sort of have a implicit sense that there's maybe some connection between the easiness of the modern world and all the various amazing things that we take for granted and um, the disenchantment of the world, right? The disenchantment of the place of humanity in the world, but it's hard
Uh-huh.
to make the link exactly. I'm not sure. Um, I mean, yeah. I
Well,
mean, one
when
thing.
people looked at the stars, when people
Mhm,
looked at the stars long ago, and the way we look at the stars now, I still get in awe of the stars,
mhm.
and I can still have that experience.
Yeah.
But before anybody knew about whatever they know about the stars now,
Hmm.
it's a very different relationship to that body of knowledge and
Hmm.
the awe of
Hmm.
the natural world, the physical, what the experience is. I mean,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
our psychology towards the world is different.
Right. Yeah. I think maybe the basic conceit there, though, is the relationship between modernity and disenchantment.
Yeah, right.
Right. So that there you can see that maybe there's a way to kind of tie in the way that technology has made our lives in many respects much easier, much more efficient. It hasn't necessarily made it better because it has perhaps involved a stripping away of either the sense that there's something magical
Yeah.
or enchanted about reality itself, but also it has stripped away the idea that human intelligence, human understanding, etc., is somehow special,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if you can reduce it to simple, well, not simple, but simply reduce it to biochemical theories,
Yeah.
material theories, then there is no place for this special sphere of human thought as both having a foot in the material world and a foot in the world of the angels or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
So perhaps there's a connection there. I mean, it's interesting too, like the Vedas actually went even further. Of course, they're before Nyāya and these other traditions, but the stronger view of this is not just that perception is like a beam that we send out to the world. They actually held that the senses were minor gods,
Yeah, that's I remember you
right?
saying that in your outline
Um,
here up there.
yeah, and so Indra sends
Devata.
out the minor deities through the senses, and I take it
Yeah.
there's a different god for each sense that kind of goes into the world,
Yeah.
and
Well, and then
um,
I think about like Christ says, the metaphor of light is so strong, like I am the light of the world, or
yeah.
it's
Hmm.
so it's very interesting. I think I'm thinking on I was just kind of amusing on a poetic sense of
Hmm.
all of a sudden thinking how important light
Oh,
was.
sure. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly metaphorically, I mean, there's the European Enlightenment. I
Yeah.
wonder,
Yeah.
like, with it's interesting the word enlightenment in a Buddhist context. I'm not sure if there's a word separate from moksha or nirvana that means enlightenment. But neither of those words, as far as I know, have anything to do with light.
Uh-huh.
Because
We
actually,
talk about enlightenment as we translate it, right?
Nirvana means an extinguishing,
Uh,
um, which is sort of interesting. I'm not sure if there's another word that has something to do with light, but
right. And people are just when they transliterate it or whatever they not transliterate when they often translate it as enlightenment, but it's maybe not exactly right, the original word than you're saying.
yeah, I'm not sure if there is a different word, because I mean, it seems like we would have encountered that word already. Although there are a lot of gaps in this book, so maybe not. I mean, I can look that up. I'm not sure if there's a Pali word that they use that means enlightenment that's separate from nirvana. But it is interesting that nirvana means getting rid of something,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is kind
Yeah,
of
shedding
the
the
opposite of
illusion.
light in a way. Um,
Yeah.
it's
Huh.
also one of these things like. Well, you were listening to some of the pre-Socratics. There was a guy named Xenophon who
Yeah.
held that. I think it was Xenophon who held that to talk about the gods is really just an exercise in anthropomorphism. And
Mhm.
if horses had gods, then they would be horse-like, etc. And
Right.
I sort of wonder what like if moles had become sentient species, what mole gods would be like. I'll bet that enlightenment would mean they would use a term that meant like damp and soft or something, right?
The endampment.
Yeah, or something that's like maybe really thick and
Yeah.
heavy or something like that. Um,
Maybe they have their own. Maybe they're doing that right now in their
mhm.
mole world.
It is interesting in the Western tradition that until the Middle Ages, the active theory of perception was the dominant one because Plato loomed large until the Middle Ages. Aristotle had been lost to the West from, I guess, the Roman Empire through till I believe, the 12th century, 13th century, 12th century actually. And as the West came in contact with the Muslim world, Aristotle came back in because they had preserved Aristotle, they had
Oh
translations
wow,
and whatnot.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
And it's at that point that the passive theory comes back in as Aristotle becomes more dominant.
Oh okay.
Um, and so, like, it just sort of annoyed me. There's like, for us Westerners, it's such a strange idea. It's like, well, no, it used to be the dominant idea until we encountered Islam.
Yeah. Right.
And then it's like, you know, but whatever. That's just a pet peeve.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, um, what else is interesting? Material accounts of sensation. This was sort of interesting with Buddhism, the I guess Yogācāra. I think at this point we're not really talking about Madhyamaka anymore. Um, Although I'm not completely sure what they agree on with respect to perception or not. But I was doing quite a bit of reading about the Madhyamaka tradition after Nagarjuna, and in particular the commentator Bhavivika, who was, I guess, like the second great commentator after Nagarjuna, who lived about 400 years later. And he's actually quite similar in many respects to Yogācāra in the fact that he's trying to kind of demystify Nagarjuna and actually set it up in a format that, for one thing, does actually provide a positive position.
Yeah, try to instead of just always refute. Yeah,
Yeah,
communicate another
exactly.
perspective.
And so then he gets refuted by the next major commentator, Chandrakirti, who then goes on to become the dominant commentator in Tibetan Buddhism. So I think that in some strains of Madhyamaka, they probably are close to Yogacara, and then in others, depending on whether you think that it's the role of Buddhist thought to provide a position, to defend a position, and so on. If you don't believe that, then you probably wouldn't have much in common with Yogacara, except for the things that all Buddhists believe because they stem directly from the earliest writings and whatnot. But we have this kind of enigmatic sentence, which I didn't really. I could have tried to read more about, but I don't really have time. But he asserts that the Buddhists identify the senses with their physical sockets. I guess the word is literally socket. I changed that to organs because I couldn't figure out what that would mean, but maybe organs is incorrect. I mean,
Well,
it's
we have these holes, right? Here, here,
yeah,
here. Those are all
yeah,
senses of
exactly.
it.
The senses are the holes, maybe, I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean,
The mouth is a hole.
um, yeah, I mean, a materialist account of sensation is always a little bit problematic because of the fact that sensation is implicated in experience, right? And so, like, it's not easy to separate what is just pure sensation from what is, as I said, like conceptualized or,
Hmm.
you know, organized in a Gestalt sense, organized
Hmm.
perception, and so on. It's fairly unlikely that you could ever, um, fully explain sensation only by talking about the organs themselves, right?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
of the whole system of the connection of the organs to, the brain and so on. I mean, it seems like it's a whole system that can't really be. I mean, you could still give it a material account of that system, but
Yes.
it's not
Right. But it's not
localizable.
going to be something you can differentiate as you experience.
Yeah. And so,
You
we
can't
have
be
that
like,
idea.
now I'm getting the in a sensational sense, but it's impossible.
Well, one thing that is interesting, the Buddhists, but also, as far as I remember, I think pretty much all the Azteca schools, certainly Samkhya and Nyāya Vaiseshika, um, hold that the mind is also one more material organ,
Mm.
right? And so that is maybe a way to save that kind of strange position that sensation is nothing more than the sockets themselves. I mean, if you're holding that the mind is also a physical organ, a material organ, then you could have more or less a complete material account of perception because the organization and the processing and so on is just a further organ, right? It's the mind
Yeah.
organ that they call it a subtle form of matter, which I don't really understand what the word subtle is
Hmm.
doing in that sentence. Maybe it's subtle because it can't be seen itself or something. Maybe I
Hmm.
don't know. I mean, the thing is, though, of course, you can't really, in the act of perception, you can't see your eyes, you can't hear your ears,
Yeah.
and I don't see how mind as an organizing organ, is any different than that.
Hmm.
Um, but they do consider mind to be on the side of matter. And the dualists hold that, you know, there is a separation between spirit and
Right.
material. It's just that really, I guess, all that spirit is Atman in the Azteca schools, and
Hmm.
everything else, including mind, consciousness, all that stuff is material,
Hmm.
which is good for some reasons because it avoids a lot of the problems of Cartesian dualism, but not all of them. And it would have been nice if he had spent a little bit more time on this. Is it clear what the problems of Cartesian dualism are?
No, I haven't got into that in my podcast or reading yet. But, I mean, I understand what dualism is now better, but yeah, tell
Yeah,
me.
is it clear why dualism follows immediately from I think, therefore I am?
Yeah, let me go back and try to think. Well, as I remember, Descartes, the only thing he could be certain of as he thought about this a lot was, I think, and that
Hmm.
means that I exist.
Hmm.
So if I know that, then, and it's impossible.
Yeah, let me help you out a little bit. To figure out how you get the distinction, the dualist
Yeah.
distinction out of that, you have to think about what is true of thought, the, and so there's going to be maybe like one property that you could name that is true of thought and is not true of everything else,
Hmm.
right? And that's how you get the distinction because the way that you distinguish typically the way you distinguish entities is you say that this entity has this property, this entity doesn't
Yeah.
have that property, so they're not the same entity,
Right.
right? So what is it about the sentence I think that um, what property does that have that nothing else has? And you're already in the right arena. You just have to kind of
Yeah. So how did
formalize
he
it or
make the
phrase it
leap
in
to
the right way.
dualism from that
What's
point?
that?
How does he make the leap to dualism from
Yeah,
that point?
yeah.
Yeah. So it seems to me like, I mean, these are all kind of new thoughts for me, but and it's only what I read. But
The
um,
other thing that's hard about it is actually the in this case the property that thought has is a negative property. So that's another reason it's going to be hard to think
oh,
about it.
really?
But it's
Okay.
essentially that thought is indubitable,
Yeah.
but
He says there's
material
no way I can
objects
doubt that. That's the one
exactly,
thing I
but
can't
material
do.
objects are dubitable. So
Uh,
therefore, they're not the same thing.
yeah. I
Right?
see.
That's essentially it. Right?
Yeah. The one
Um,
thing I'm certain of is this: I can't be certain of anything else.
mhm,
Basically, is that what he's
mhm.
saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's got to be difference.
And it turns out then he comes up with a bunch of other distinctions like material extension, extension in space, right? Material bodies are extended in space, but thought doesn't seem to be extended in space.
Hmm.
And there are a few others. But the point is that he has this very strong distinction between thought, which he calls spirit or esprit, is what it is in the original, versus matter, bodies, this kind of thing.
Okay.
And then the main problem is that given that distinction, um, it's fairly hard, and given it's not just that they're distinct members of the same class or of the same type of thing. They are substantially different. They're different substances, which
Mm,
means that they
okay.
are essentially different.
Okay.
And one problem with that is that given that he claims that they're essentially different, he has to explain how it's possible that they interact. Because obviously, things like reasons, or maybe even like things like perceptions, right? Like
Yeah.
you hit me with a hammer and I go, ow,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Um, and then because you hit me with the hammer and I went, ow, actually, that's all causal.
Yeah.
Um, because of that, then I form a belief about how terrible you are. But
Yeah.
that belief about how terrible you are is a thought. It's not material. So
Right.
how did the material interactions motivate something that's not material? And
Well,
it goes
why
the
does
other
he
way
think?
too. It goes the other way too, right? Like you want to learn about Buddhist philosophy, so you got your butt up. Well, actually, I didn't get my butt up on time, but you got up, got dressed, sat down, turned on your computer. Those are all material actions, but they're motivated by something that's not material. The reason I want to talk about Buddhist philosophy.
Yeah.
So, in other words, these things, minds and bodies, obviously interact, but if they're substantially different, then it seems like it should be impossible for them to interact.
That part I'm not following in the logic. Why should it be possible that things that are substantially different? Why is it impossible for them to interact?
Okay. Generally, there's the idea that in order for things to interact, they have to be um, similar in some respect, right? In other words, um, uh,
There's some other similarity at a higher level. That's the idea
well, I mean, you
at a
could maybe I
base
could
level.
just first of all make a material analogy or something like that. Uh, like if I want to like hook these two pencils together, right? That's only possible because of shared properties of solidity and whatever else, like the
Yeah,
shape and all this kind of stuff that enables that kind of interaction. But if
sure.
they're wholly different, like let's say that this is a glob of pudding
Yeah,
and this is a pencil. Of course,
right.
they're still just material entities, but I couldn't get that kind of interaction.
Yeah.
So and
But you
now
couldn't
that's
get
not
that kind, but you could get some kind.
yes, but that's because they're substantially the same. In other words, they're
Yeah,
both material. But
right.
mind and material are supposed
Matter.
to be substantially different.
Yeah, so then maybe, so then you're saying that's a problem with dualism because maybe they're not inseparable as he thinks.
Yeah. So another way to think about it is, you know how I was talking about with psychologism, there's a distinction between causality,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
normativity, and that
right.
reasons function or are motivated or motivate things normatively. They
Hmm.
motivate other reasons.
Hmm.
And objects are in causal relationships, but these are
Hmm.
two distinct types of motivation.
Hmm.
So how is it possible for them to interact?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a
Right.
very interesting thought. I don't have an answer, but like, but it's interesting because it seems like, and we're all trying to think about this, right? It's
Yeah.
all comes from human endeavor of thinking and really trying to separate
Hmm.
and cause, like, well, how is that possible when extracting out these properties and
Hmm.
defining them, uh, you know, so definitively, let's just say, and trying to order that
Hmm.
is is a kind of a fool's errand in a way, maybe, right? I mean,
Well, I think yeah, it is a fool's errand, but it's a fool's errand that only arises because of dualism. In other words, you can avoid the problem by not being a dualist, by saying
yeah,
that
I suppose, yeah,
everything is either material or everything is either mind,
yeah,
like some kind of uh, not hallucination, but virtual kind of thing, simulation or
sure,
whatever, right?
simulation, sure,
Whatever. And then that problem doesn't arise. It only arises if you have this sort of hardline dualist conception of mind as immaterial,
but
as
don't
essentially.
things come? Aren't there problems with? Is it monism, right? Aren't there problems with monism as
The
well?
problem with monism is that we don't understand how entities that have objective ontologies can give rise to an entity that has a subjective ontology,
Uh-huh.
right? In other words, you could hold that everything is material, but we don't have a good way of explaining how neurons firing gives rise to the subjective awareness of seeing rainbows,
Yeah.
right? Um, it's not to say that it's impossible to give a theory, but nobody has been able to piece that piece that together. And so um, consciousness does have this. If you're interested about this, you can look up David Chalmers and the hard problem of consciousness. Um, but the essential thing is that there are certain properties that material objects have that consciousness itself seems to lack, and um, it seems fairly obvious. Maybe this isn't. Maybe there's a way to argue against this, but it seems fairly obvious that if two entities um, don't share all and only the same properties, they're not the same thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So if
Right.
consciousness doesn't share certain properties that electrical impulses in the brain share,
Yeah.
and electrical impulses don't share like the qualitative awareness of red,
Yeah.
It
Right.
seems like these can't possibly be identical.
Right.
So they must be different things if they're not
Right.
identical, right?
So
Um,
neither is bulletproof. Neither viewpoint is bulletproof.
yeah, yeah. And so you try to figure out um, how to resolve that question. And there are even people that claim that um, just because of the subjective ontology of consciousness, it will never be possible to give a scientific theory because scientific theories are essentially objective theories,
Yeah. Right.
right? Um, Most people don't like that. Most people want to still believe that the human mind, the human intellect can know everything. Most scientists, or at least most neurologists, I guess. But it is a problem that even if you're a materialist, you can't totally get out of the problem because we don't have a good theory for how subjective awareness arises out of a material substrate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these are the sorts of things that, in a very general sense, make me like feel like Nagarjuna had it right. Like, or like there's. It's just. It's like it's just when you look at reality, you can look at it this way, you can look at it that way, and maybe when you get to nirvana, the state of nirvana,
Well,
letting go of everything,
yeah,
you're
I mean, there are a couple different things you could mean by saying Nagarjuna has it right. You could mean that his argument is successful, or you could mean something perhaps more like um, the way of life that he models in rejecting this way of thinking is right. If you want to make the claim that his argument is right, then
well, yeah, but he doesn't put forth a positive argument,
he
as we
doesn't
said,
put
right?
forth a positive argument, so that's already a problem. But even people like Bhavevika or whoever who try to,
Yeah.
positivize what Nagarjuna is doing, in order for them to quote unquote really be right, they would have to show that it is impossible to answer these questions, right? And then you could say, then you could really know that it's a waste of time to try.
Yeah, I don't think it's a waste of time. I don't want to say that much. I Here we are,
Yeah,
but
yeah, but the point is, it's very easy to slide from a skeptical position
yes,
to
yes,
a non-skeptical position where you deny the existence
yes, yes,
of
yes.
something,
I've
right?
been reading about skepticism a little bit, and again, I'm just encountering a lot of these ideas for the first time, so I don't have my own. I'm swimming in a lot of ideas, but I haven't like come to any the Svoboda viewpoint, let's say.
Well,
But
what I meant by saying that denial,
uh-huh.
in the sense of absolute denial, is non-skeptical. It seems like it should still be skeptical because you're denying that, say, the external world exists or whatever. But it's different for the following reason. In the kind of light skepticism that Nagarjuna is performing,
Yeah,
it's simply asking people how they know.
yeah,
But it's easy to slide from that to the assertion you don't know because what you're saying is false,
hmm,
right? Nagarjuna might not be saying that it's false that the external world exists because he's
hmm,
not defending a position. He's
hmm,
simply saying, what makes you think you know that the external world exists?
hmm. But
But
don't they put?
then,
Don't they
then
put?
you
Doesn't he
can,
put forth? In some sense, we say it's not positive, but doesn't he put forth some posits like it's all dharma? Uh,
well, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the dharmas are also supposed to be
and even that's
empty.
empty. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
it's right.
empty,
It's all
right?
dharma, and even
And
that
so,
concept's
so I guess
empty.
you could say
Sort of circular.
it's all pratitya samutpada, which was
Yeah.
the interdependent arising, right? Okay,
Mhm.
yeah, maybe so. I mean, but even there, I think that to the extent that Nagarjuna is right, for me anyway, not everybody shares this view, but for me, it really only makes sense as a kind of enacted therapy, as a kind of modeling for what it would
Hmm.
look like, not to drive yourself insane trying to answer questions that you're never going to be able to answer, but not
Yeah.
because you know that it's impossible to
Yeah.
answer them,
Yeah.
but simply that there's no reason to think that you can answer them,
Yeah. Right.
right? But yeah, maybe an easier kind of way to see this in a more contemporary example is to talk about atheism and the way that atheists very often go from you can't prove that God exists to assuming that that is a proof that God doesn't exist.
Right. Not the
And it's
same
not,
thing. Right.
right?
Not the same
Because the
thing.
possibility of God remains open even if you can't prove that God exists,
Yeah.
right? And that's the same kind of fallacy where you move from a negative position where
Hmm.
you're simply asking about how certain somebody can be or whether they know something
Hmm.
to then a perhaps even dogmatic position where you
Right.
assert the impossibility of the thing that you were
Right.
questioning before.
Well, see, I think that's what I meant. Like, I guess personally, and maybe it's just that at some point I don't know the answers, of course, like a lot of people don't, or I get tired of it, or I don't also want at some level, I guess I don't, it's probably want or care
Mm-hmm.
about unraveling the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm okay, like we were just talking about, well, what happens? Why do I always lose? I can never tell the moment I fall asleep.
Yeah.
And like, so there's this moment, and then or the idea of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, you
Yeah.
can't have this and that at the same time, and
Here's
then
what I say
okay.
about that basic attitude. First of all, I kind of agree with it. It depends on whether I have my whatever philosopher versus artist hat on. I think that
Yeah.
actually clear, distinct understanding can often be a detriment to aesthetic experience.
Mm.
But what I'll say about
Yeah.
the pleasure of mysteries or
Hmm.
of the mysterious or the unexplainable or whatever or the unanswerable is that
Hmm.
actually trying rigorously to answer questions reveals new mysteries.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so, like you invoke Heisenberg. Heisenberg didn't get to that just by saying, "Ah, you know what? Nobody can answer it. It's all mysterious." He did it through like really
Yeah,
hardcore
right.
mathematics.
Right,
you
but
know,
right. I'm only making that connection because it's just it shows me it's sort of comforting to me actually. It's comforting to me
I
that
think
we can't get to the bottom of everything.
one thing that's also kind of interesting is, I agree that the sense of wonder kind of collapses once you're able to explain something. And I do think that in the case of certain, like the uncertainty principle or whatever, wonder remains. What I think is interesting and what philosophy does quite well is making those mysteries precise, the terms of the mysteries. What in
Yes, right.
particular is mysterious?
Yeah.
Instead of it's all, nobody can answer it. Oh,
Yeah, of
okay.
course. Yeah. No, there's a value in it.
Yeah.
Hmm. But in the very like it seems like we're uncovering the logical some arguments that are being made to their ends, and we get to this to get to
Mhm.
these unanswerables, and it's similar to like Socrates got to unanswerables. Many of these philosophers.
Well, again, with Socrates, he starts off in a place, or at least his interlocutors start off in a place where they think they know the answer.
Yeah, and
And it's
he
only
just
by
throws.
doing
He's like
philosophy,
Nagarjuna.
but again, it's only in doing philosophy that the mystery is revealed,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
right? So, yeah, that I think is simply to show that that kind of rigorous thinking isn't the enemy of
No, and
that sort
please,
of
I don't. I'm not thinking
mysterious
that
wonder.
way. I'm not thinking that way. I just there's a part of me that loves the fact, actually, that we don't have all the answers.
hmm
To
Think
me,
about
that is the most beautiful
think
part of it.
yeah, think about how boring and just sort of maybe meaningless or purposeless life would be if we did.
Exactly.
you know,
Right.
um, that's why I often think that it's good that we're mortal. It's good that we're finite.
Yeah.
If we were infinite and had infinite power and infinite knowledge and
Yeah.
so on, it's hard to see how life could be meaningful.
Again, like we take this light for granted, and I could like, oh, I'll just get a new one.
hmm
But man, if I lived whatever thousands of years ago, like,
Yeah. Maybe we could say a few more things about the relationship between language and perception, because there were a couple cool points that we didn't get to last
I would
time.
love that. Yeah, that's cool.
And so, maybe just as an exercise, you can kind of give a summary of what we talked about, the relationship between concepts, language, and perception from yesterday,
Okay.
and then we'll talk about Bhartṛhari, who has a kind of idiosyncratic and interesting view. What do you remember from yesterday?
Oh gosh. Huck. Oh boy. Um,
See, this is another reason why philosophy is good because in addition to simply, you know, encountering new interesting ideas that you understand, it's actually like learning a language. It's generally not so hard. Sometimes it's hard, but it's generally easier to follow an argument
Yes,
than to
like
reconstruct it
listen.
yourself.
Yes, of course.
So
Right.
what
I
what what
mean,
what can you
honestly, I
say?
don't think I can articulate. It's too new for me. There were so many terms and like concepts that were new, but
Yeah.
I could follow what you were saying. Like you're saying, to some degree, I really could.
Uh-huh.
But I'm having a hard time grasping it today. I mean, I'd
Okay.
like to reformulate it.
Well, one thing I did, maybe I'll try to start you
Yeah,
off a little
prod me
bit.
a little bit.
One thing I did was to first of all make a distinction in the word concept or
Hmm.
conceptual. It could mean either the activity of the mind that forms perceptual groups,
Hmm. Yeah.
or it could be the activity of the mind that collects those perceptual groups under a name.
Hmm.
Is it clear what I'm saying? Collects those perceptual groups under a name?
Puts a word to it. Puts a
Yeah,
language
yeah,
to it.
exactly. So, like, all the groups that are sufficiently similar such that they can be called horses
Yeah.
is to
Or
collect them under a name.
yeah.
Whereas perceptually, the mind is also in the activity of if you're looking out on a field, you see a fence and grass and the sun and
Yeah.
also a brown swath
Right.
of color moving around. Perceptually, you group
Right.
that brown swath of color as something different from the grass, from the sun.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
that is also often invoked uh, under the concept of conceptualization. And the main thing is that really they're not different types of activity. They both have to do with taking some kind of manifold, either of
Mm.
sensation or of discrete objects,
Hmm.
and collecting them into a
Yes.
group.
And that's where we put language in, and that's
Yeah.
through language we understand the world then, and we organize the world.
Hmm. And so then the question is also, what are we calling language? Is language just the names? Or
Hmm.
is language the capacity to group at all? One way of looking at this is, we talk, and this is another kind of equivocation that people fall victim to. You talk about language, and then you think, oh, yeah, I know what language is. There's English, there's Chinese, there's Spanish, German, whatever. So I know what language is. But language itself is the capacity to have any of those languages.
Hmm.
Right. In other words, it's a human capacity to form groups, to
Yeah.
organize
And
perception, to
organize.
organize
Yes.
thoughts, etc., in essentially a logical structure.
You're right.
And the specific language that you speak is just,
Yeah.
like the program that rides on top of that
Right.
operating system
Right.
or something. Right.
Yes.
Okay. So if we're defining logic, or not logic, if we're defining language that way,
Hmm.
then it seems obvious that language as the capacity to speak a language or learn a language is already implicated in Gestalt style
Hmm.
organization because all it means is a vast set of rules that enables us to group things to organize our mental activity in ordered and logical way.
Hmm.
Okay, and that is basically Bhartṛhari's point, right? Because Bhartṛhari says that perception is essentially linguistic. I don't know if you remember Bhartṛhari from the first week we were doing this.
I'm not at the moment. No.
Bhartṛhari was a grammarian. I think he lived in the 7th century.
Okay.
And he was one of these people that defended the idea that the universe was written in the Sanskrit language.
Okay. Right. Right.
Right.
Right. I
So
remember
that
talking about that.
not only perception, but reality itself is essentially linguistic.
Yeah.
And it kind of stands to reason that if perception is a member of the set of all existence,
Hmm.
that it would also be linguistic
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
reality itself is linguistic. Um, but he's defending a claim that essentially holds that perception is essentially linguistic because you can't have perception without that basic level of organization,
Hmm.
right? You
Yes.
can't get to just like bare perception without, you don't necessarily have to be able to name the things you're seeing. Like,
Hmm.
let's say you see a new animal you've never seen
Yeah.
before, you don't know the name. That's distinct from Man, living high on your potatoes and whatever else you got there.
They're very kind to me.
Yeah, I see that. Um, you know, his claim would essentially be that you can't have truly non-linguistic experience because experience, at the moment it shows up to us, it's already organized.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. And then let's talk for a second about concepts that are not material in
Okay.
language.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, concepts are never material in the
Yeah, right. So
normal
so it's just
analysis.
not the things we see through our senses, but then also, of course, language develops into higher level concepts of how we thank you. How thank you so much. How we organize, how we
Yeah.
or
Yeah. I mean, if it weren't the case that experience were organized,
yeah.
then we could say that, like, a 10-cent light cell,
Uh-huh.
light sensor or something, has experience because it can tell, or not even that, but any material object can tell the difference, can tell
Right.
important differences, can distinguish important differences in its environment. You have a metal bar. Nobody thinks the metal bar is conscious. Yet when it rains, the bar rusts. So
Yeah.
therefore, the bar is able to quote unquote sense the moisture because it adapts accordingly or something like that, right? I mean, if there were no additional organizing aspect to perception, we would have to say that the bar is perceiving the rain,
Yeah.
right? So
No, I
it
follow
seems,
all that. I was
yeah,
just I guess I was just thinking about how we use language for a second.
yeah,
And it's not just about naming things and organizing them from our senses, but then at some point we come up with concepts like what is idealism, you
oh,
know?
oh,
And
oh, I see, more abstract concepts.
yeah, more abstractions.
I see,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, what's the question exactly?
What's that?
What were you asking
No,
a
I
question?
was just like I think it's a very I had before talking to you in Seattle,
Mhm.
I had never really considered just how much language um how embedded language is in our
Mhm.
understanding of reality perception, all how these things come together through language, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm.
um
Yeah.
and how it's a reflection of our experience at a very basic level. It's the way that we not just communicate, but the way that we
Hold that thought. I'm gonna run to the bathroom really quick.
oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
All right, just a second. Okay, I'm back.
So I mean, it's very interesting. I don't know enough about this, but I'm curious about it. So you were talking about Bar, what's
But
his name? Bar
Bhartṛhari.
Bhartṛhari, and how and then sometimes I've heard about Chomsky's. I don't know much about it.
Hmm.
Chomsky's theories of language,
Hmm.
and then this idea that the word has always existed. That Sanskrit, that's where this all started.
Hmm.
But I'm trying to conceptualize, uh, you know, how they come to that. How do
How
they
they come to
what
what?
that looks like for them? I guess.
Well, I guess I don't know what the it is in that sentence.
Uh, okay. So, like even in your outline here, it says Bhartṛhari replies the children inherent linguistic structures, even if not yet expressed. This relates to Plato's recollection of Meno in his dialogue with Meno, right? Is that it?
Well, yeah,
And
okay, maybe I can explain that a little bit, and then that might help you articulate the question a little bit better. So Bhattacharya is saying that there is no experience without language. There
yes.
is no perception without language. That aspect of mental activity is essentially linguistic because, as I said, at the moment that it shows up to us, it's already organized
Yeah.
in terms of distinct objects and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yes. Right.
So then a very obvious reply to that, if you disagree, would be, well, wait a minute. What about animals? What about children before they've learned a language and so on? I don't know what Bhartṛhari's response to animals would be, but his response to the question about children is kind of interesting. What he says is that children, there are no non-linguistic children. Now, it's true that children start speaking when they're about 18 months old or so, but already they're linguistic at the moment of their birth. And
Yes.
the way that the way that Chomsky explains that is that it's basically a biological adaptation.
Yes.
The way that Plato describes it is that before we inhabit bodies, we're like spirits, free-floating spirits in the world of the forms, and
Yeah.
we come to know things immediately. We come to know the forms immediately before we are embodied, and then we have to remember them when we're in
Yeah.
bodies. With
And this is a
Bhartṛhari,
little bit like his idea of rebirth. That you come
exactly
in.
right. With Bhartṛhari, the
Right.
idea is that we have always been linguistic even before we were born.
So then it comes. So then tying that back to Sanskrit
Hmm.
is the original language that the universe is written in.
Hmm.
It's just in the beginning there was this self-evident experience that as soon as consciousness came into the world, we could name it, and so then it's always been there. Is that the idea?
I think that I don't know enough about Bhartṛhari to know how he would handle that question. I am familiar with other approaches to that question, and so I could talk about that. It may or may not have very much similarity to what Bhartṛhari would say. But essentially, yeah, you're raising a question about something that seems maybe like a regress of some
Yeah.
sort, right? It's like, well, if we inherit this kind of organizing principle, say in our minds or whatever, or if reality has this organizing principle, then how did it get started, right? It
Yeah, I
seems
think
like
that's
there's got
right.
to be
And
this.
they just say it was always there. It seems to me.
Yeah, so that would certainly be a response to that. There's this thing you might want to write this down because you're having fun with the ancient Greeks. There's this thing called Agrippa's trilemma,
Okay.
and this is a problem that arises whenever you have some kind of chain of inheritance of any kind, either justification or causality or whatever. A causes B, B causes C, C causes D, but what caused A?
Yeah, right.
Right? And he says that there are three answers to that. And the reason it's a trilemma is that depending on how you look at things, they're all bad answers.
Okay.
But the first one is that A is somehow self-justifying, self-caused.
Yeah.
That's like the view of God as being self-caused. A necessary being is something that causes itself, whatever that means. The next answer would be that it goes back infinitely. You have an infinite regress, but even there, it's not so clear that that answers the question because
How to get started. Yeah.
yeah, or even if you say, well, there was no beginning because it goes back infinitely, so maybe that diffuses the question a little bit. You still have to raise the question, okay, but how did the power to justify, how did the power to cause, how did the power to
Yeah.
organize get in there, even if
Yeah.
it's infinite, right? And then the third response is it's circular,
Hmm.
that A causes B, B causes C, C causes A,
Okay.
something like that,
Hmm.
right? And that
Yeah.
seems like a problem too.
Sure.
Um, However, depending on your outlook, uh, there's no reason to think. Hey, hello. There's no reason to think that uh, those are necessarily bad answers. I mean, it's very hard for us to wrap our heads around what it would mean for something to be self-caused
Hmm. Yeah.
or whatever, but it doesn't mean that it's false just
Hmm.
because.
Yeah. They at some point, thank you. At some point, it seems like they have to pick a position, which is they picked this position.
I would be tempted to, or by the way, there is a fourth alternative,
Uh-huh.
which is that you stop asking for foundations,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a move that a lot of people make.
Uh-huh.
For my uh, on my view, it's not clear whether Nagarjuna makes that move or
Hmm.
not, because it seems
Hmm.
like he is also advocating for an ultimate state of affairs, which is interconnected being and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the idea that, um, and also one reason to doubt that Nagarjuna would make that move is that he still seems to think about knowledge in terms of certainty,
Mm.
right? A move that would get out of the search for foundations would then be able to hold that knowledge is possible without ultimate grounding.
Mm.
So it doesn't have to be certain for it to still
Right.
count as knowledge,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, that's for me probably the best move. That is a move that is often defended in what is called pragmatism.
Hmm.
That you don't need the foundation because knowledge works.
Hmm. Yeah.
um, but if you're going to go with the
Well, there's
first,
also this theory I came up across. I can't remember the
yeah,
title. I have to go into the room about if you can reasonably assume if you can't like there was this test that you could put it to, and they named this test. I'm trying to remember what the name of it. I have to go look. But instead of going through infinite regress, if you can rationally assume that this is not negating every other experience you've had, and there's no reason to get there's no like how can you this is an answer to the skeptics, I think. How can
okay,
you prove that this is not just the dream of some giant ant right now, that what we're experiencing,
okay.
and so it's a way to like say let's stop with the nonsense in a sense, like that
Oh
just
well,
became.
that sounds like something we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, where it's like, why should we accept the doubt as more
Uh-huh.
certain, right? Can't you just doubt the doubt?
Hmm.
Can't I
Yeah,
say I'm
yeah.
more certain that I have a hand because I use it all the time, so why should I doubt that I have a hand? So that is one response. That doesn't necessarily get you. One thing we could say about that response is that really just seems like I don't know. I mean, there could be a foundationalist or a non-foundationalist interpretation of that. If you think that the foundation for knowledge is, um, your capacity to interact in a competent way with the world, maybe that's a foundation for knowledge. Or you could also hold that um,
Pragmatism, yeah.
you don't need foundations because foundations. So one thing about foundationalism, like if you're talking about foundationalism about knowledge justification, how do you know? And then you say, well, because I saw it. How do you know that seeing it? It's
Uh-huh.
constantly asking for you to be able to know how you know. In
Hmm.
other words, it's constantly demanding that knowledge means that you have an internal awareness of the reasons for your knowledge.
Hmm.
And externalism doesn't require that. Externalism only requires that you do know, not that you be able to say why you know,
Yeah, okay.
right?
That's enough,
And
yeah.
so it's non-foundationalist in that respect. You could maybe take a foundationalist approach if you want to say that actual coping in the material world is the foundation for knowledge.
Hmm.
What I was going to say though is of those three, the infinite regress, the self-evident or self-caused beginning of the chain, or the circle, I think that um, the circle is maybe not such a bad option because circular reasoning is not necessarily a bad thing. This is something maybe you can read a little bit about. There's a difference between a vicious circle and a virtuous circle. A
Okay.
vicious circle is a type of circular reasoning that undermines itself.
Yes.
But as long as the circle doesn't undermine itself,
Yeah.
there's not really anything wrong with it.
Right. Okay. That's very interesting. I have not come across that. Of course, I've read a little bit about circular reasoning and as a fallacy, but for justification and sort of logical argumentation, right? But at some point, as it's chasing its tail, if you're saying that it doesn't disprove or prove anything about foundations,
Yeah.
and it's not a fallacy, it's not operating as a fallacy in logical thinking, perhaps it
Hmm.
is the
Right.
best answer to we don't know.
Well, I think that you could defend a view that holds that we do know because of the circularity and the fact that the circle doesn't undermine itself,
Yeah.
right? Because the thing is that then you would want to identify any place that um, uncertainty would creep in the circle. And
Uh-huh.
if it is actually a complete circle, then you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to identify any specific point that's not justified. Because even
Yeah.
A is justified by C.
And
Right.
doesn't it seem like this is what Nagarjuna does in a sense?
I was going to say that, because the theory of interdependent arising
Yeah.
is actually a circular view of causality,
Yeah.
right? It's not
Right.
linear in the sense of it being A, B, C, D, A.
Yeah.
It's all sort of simultaneous
Yeah,
or,
that's
or
right.
synchronic or something. But it
And you
is the
can't
idea
separate a
that
foundational cause and effect relationship.
everything causes everything,
Yes.
right? Which is essentially circular. You're
Yeah.
saying, you know, um,
Yeah.
right? It's maybe a little bit more complicated than a circle. It's more like a network or a web.
Hmm.
But even so, the individual term, well, there aren't individual terms in interdependent arising, but just as a fiction, to make it easier to
Yeah.
understand, let's say that they're like little nodes. They're all
Yeah.
connected,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
What's different, of course, is that they're not really nodes with connections. It's two different things. It's the constant connection is what the
Yes.
web is.
And you can't separate it out and cause foundationals to cause a series of events linearly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right. And their idea is that you eventually see this. You eventually see this when you reach a state of nirvana. That
Hmm.
people can be trapped in what their illusions are, but this is really uh,
Hmm.
this is really more close to what's going on, or I guess, or what's this is really what's going on.
Hmm. Hmm. So, I think that both the Buddhists and the Nyayas would disagree with Bhartṛhari and his idea that all experience is essentially linguistic. I will say that, but excuse me, but Bhartṛhari's theory is um, closer, I think, to the most widely accepted theory of perception today. That there is something essentially linguistic about perception. That perception is always concept laden or theory laden, although it's still a fairly live debate these days. I mean, maybe one thing I could do, so a couple of directions that would be interesting to go in is look at some of the responses from the Buddhists and the Nyayas against Bhattacharya's idea, but maybe more kind of topical or timely would be for me to ask you uh, what are some advantages and disadvantages of theories that hold that you can get to perception without concepts on maybe like a socio-cultural level, right?
You
Like,
can get to perception without concepts. The theory that you can get to perception without concepts, that,
yeah, why would someone want to have a theory like that?
well, then if you can get to perception without concepts, it would mean that there is an external truth out there of the
Maybe,
world.
maybe. Although the Buddhists, Yogacara Buddhists, think you can get to perception without concepts and also deny the existence of the external world because
Right.
it's all just ideal. It's all in the mind. Now, just because it's in the mind doesn't mean that it's conceptual. It can still be non-conceptual and in the mind.
Hmm.
But that distinction of conceptual and non-conceptual doesn't immediately license the belief in an external world,
Hmm.
right? You can actually deny the external world and still hold that perception can be non-conceptual or conceptual, either way.
So, what would be the advantage to your again? The question is, what would be the advantage of seeing to believing or whatever that
Maybe.
there's a non that there's a there, there's a
Um,
percep there's a
yeah, maybe I'll throw
perception.
out a few words to grasp onto that might help a little bit. I think it's going to have to do with whether we take concepts or language or words or opinions about the world, maybe even as in some way arbitrary or not,
Hmm.
right? And then you could also think about like maybe certain postmodern critiques
Hmm.
of truth and understanding
Hmm.
and their social constructedness,
Hmm.
etc. What does that have to do with the
Yeah, I
capacity to
think that,
get
that
beneath
those it seems to me
concepts?
like they want certainty instead of putting everything into a contextual, perhaps like everything gets contextualized. In the postmodern world, it seems to me like everything everything is almost in doubt or is fluctuating according to context.
Hmm.
That you can't really fix things in a sort of a fixed truth.
Hmm.
That it's highly I don't know if subjective is exactly the right word, but it's highly dependent upon a variety of factors that are not
Hmm.
fixed.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and perhaps that there's a human desire for many people to want certainty in a very uncertain world,
Hmm.
and so perhaps the desire stems from wanting to
Yeah,
be more certain.
maybe I could.
Am I
It
close?
is kind of interesting because you do point up the capacity to make a claim about certainty from a non-conceptual theory of perception, which is true. And so, in that respect, it would maybe be at odds with a postmodern conception of knowledge or experience or whatever. So, it is actually kind of interesting that certainty is still available as a position, even if you want to get rid of concepts in
Hmm.
perception, because then you're in a kind of Cartesian place where you say that you can't be wrong about your perception. You can be wrong that your perception is a snake instead of a rope, but you can't be wrong that you're perceiving something.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to license a kind of certainty because they make perhaps the invalid connection from from the fact that you can't be wrong to the fact that you're necessarily right.
Hmm.
However, if you hold with the guy I was talking about before, Wilfred Sellers, that perception isn't actually about being right or wrong because it's not about reasons, it's just causal,
Hmm.
then you don't get certainty out of that. But what I was thinking is maybe something a little bit different, which is, a Yogacara might respond in a way that's kind of similar to like a pretty hardcore postmodernist when I talk about the following thing. It's like, hey, do you like my cup? They might both say, what makes you think that's a cup? And it's like,
Hmm.
oh, well, it fits the definition of cup. And then they say, yeah, but how did you get that concept cup? And it's like, essentially, they would hold that the concept itself is arbitrary and is just connected to the the chance things that happen in the society that I was acculturated in. Right?
Hmm.
It just so happens that I live in a society that has a need for the concept cup, and so therefore I call this a cup. But is it essentially a cup, or is that just a kind of social construction?
Hmm.
Right? And with the cup, it's a stupid example. But what if I say something like a moral agent? People are
Hmm.
responsible for doing the right or wrong thing, and if they do the wrong thing, we should punish them.
Hmm.
And then, from the point of view of social constructivism,
Hmm.
to say, well, what is this concept that you've got moral agent?
Hmm.
That's just something, it doesn't really exist. It's just an
Right.
arbitrary thing that your language licenses or that your culture licenses,
Hmm.
but it's not real,
Hmm.
right? So, to a certain extent, there's a kind of freedom that
Hmm.
comes out of that, right? Freedom from the arbitrary truths of a culture or of a
Yeah.
language.
Cultural relativism.
Yeah, I mean, um, one way of looking at that with respect to what Bhartṛhari is doing, I think that probably there there is kind of a confusion about what concepts are, what language is, because there is obviously something extremely arbitrary about language.
Hmm.
This in English is cup, and the German word is Tasse. I mean, it doesn't seem like I could defend the idea that cup, that sound, somehow naturally connects to this object because the German word is Tasse or whatever. Every language is going to have a totally different word, and there doesn't seem to be anything
Yeah.
other than a completely arbitrary connection between, say, the
Sure.
sound of the name and
Sure.
the object it picks out. But what about even the concept itself, the sort of Gestalt group itself? Isn't there perhaps something arbitrary about the fact that we see snow and the Inuit see 30
Right.
different things?
Right.
Right?
Or
Um,
sometimes Hon Juan will tell me, I'll say, what does that mean in Chinese? She says, you don't have this concept in English.
mm,
It's
yeah,
very
sure.
interesting.
Sure. So it's easy to go from that kind of
Yeah.
obvious and almost kind of trivial observation. It seems obviously true that there is a large element of arbitrariness to language,
Mm-hmm.
to then make the slide into saying that language is ultimately arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is that if you defend more like a Chomskyan or maybe Bhartṛharian view of language as not just whatever the program is, but the operating system,
Mm-hmm.
logic, the consistency of those kinds of mental operations, gestalt grouping, logical inference, all this kind of stuff that make language possible,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot harder to say that that's arbitrary,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because after all,
That happens in every culture and every language
I
through
mean,
time.
the thing is that let's say there's a word in Chinese that doesn't pick out the same kind of thing in English. Um, if it's possible at all to
Yeah.
use 20 English words for one Chinese word or use
Yeah.
metaphors or
Yeah.
whatever, if
Yeah.
there's any way
And get close
whatsoever
to it. Right.
to translate the basic meaning, the
Yeah.
denotative meaning
Yeah.
here, um, into English, then it's true that there's a kind of arbitrariness about the way that English cuts up the world into
Yeah.
its words versus Chinese. But
Sure.
if it's possible to, at a lower level, translate,
Yeah.
then it's
Sure.
not that there are different conceptual schemes. It's
Right.
that the languages have a sort of arbitrariness in the way that they express those
Sure.
conceptual schemes, but we can learn to recognize 30 different types of stuff,
Right.
even though
And
we.
you're saying at a base level, no matter what the language is through time, the Chomskyans and perhaps the Bhartṛharis would say that you know humans endeavor in this other kind of meaning of language
Mhm.
of how we organize, how we conceptualize, and sometimes it's clunky to translate it, but it can be done.
Yeah, and the idea again is if it can be done, then um, these aren't essentially
Yeah,
different conceptual schemes,
yeah, yeah.
right?
It's not as arbitrary.
Yeah, and so you know that doesn't mean to say that we do really get to truth through the specific languages that we use
Hmm.
to describe the world,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, I mean, it's true that also being acculturated in a language and so on does, um, kind of um, emphasize a particular view on what objects exist. Like why do we call pots the same whether or not they're red or blue, whereas we could call them blue pots as something that's different from red
Yeah,
pots or something
it's
like
not.
that.
It's yeah, right.
But the point is that even though in, say, English or whatever, we think pots and then whatever the properties are secondary, we can still nonetheless think about what it would be like to separate the world into blue pots and red pots as different things,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Um,
I mean, like we could think about how the world's done that at sometimes to real great evil. The
well,
people.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So there is a connection between the words and concepts we use and how reality actually shows up to us,
Yeah.
right? It's not that we just by default, because we use language, see reality. I mean, languages are a way to kind of hold reality or to
Hmm.
kind of grasp at reality.
Hmm.
It doesn't necessarily mean that we actually see reality through the use of language. Like for instance, with those images I was showing, you say fighter jet, and suddenly the fighter jets pop out at you or whatever. I mean, it does seem that in cases like that, um, the knowledge of what a jet is or what a giraffe is or whatever is one of the things that can help you organize
Hmm.
reality, right? Organize a perceptual field or something like that.
But you can still at that point see it either as a giraffe or a bunch of splotches,
Mhm.
or you can see it either as a city or the fighter jets flying over a landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. So the point is, I mean, the arbitrariness of language does play a role in maybe like the surface way that you see things.
Hmm.
But people like Chomsky or others in that camp would say, but that arbitrariness is not like a complete authoritative imposition on how we see the world,
Hmm.
right? It's like because languages are there is a large degree of arbitrariness to the specific language we're using, but that it doesn't follow from that that the very capacity for language is therefore simply arbitrary or
Yeah.
subject to different conceptual schemes across people.
Yeah.
Um, so um, they tend to deny that social constructivism plays very much of a role in certain scientific endeavors, right? Because science is supposed to get beneath the arbitrariness of a specific
Yeah.
language.
Right.
Like a strong postmodernist would hold that even seeing the world as in space and time in a certain way is just made up, is just
Hmm.
arbitrary,
Hmm.
you know. And it may be that human consciousness, in seeing it in space, in seeing it in time, doesn't necessarily perceive reality as itself. It's not the case necessarily that reality is spatial, is temporal, even though we have to see it in space and time. But someone like Chomsky would argue, yeah, that doesn't matter because all he's trying to establish is that discourse is possible, like uh, a sort of maybe like unbiased, even universal dimension to maximally fair, maximally transparent discourse is possible
Hmm.
because we all share this basic
Yeah.
kind of
Right.
operating system.
Right.
Um, Whereas a postmodernist would say it is arbitrary all the way down.
Well, is that what they say? I don't know. I don't know maybe enough about
Well, the thing
postmodern.
about postmodernism is that it's like a catch-all term for lots of different,
Yeah.
like the strong
Right. It's just
postmodernists. The only thing that's strong, or not strong, the original postmodernists, people like what's his name, the guy that wrote the postmodern condition. I can't remember his name now off the top of my head. His real complaint, his only major complaint was the idea of meta narratives, the idea that we constantly try to think about history as being a story of progress through time and this kind of thing.
yeah.
He just wanted to scrap that.
Right.
Postmodernism often is taken to like the strongest formulation of it would be that all all narratives, not just meta narratives, but all narratives, including narratives we tell about objects belonging to a concept or something, right?
Yeah.
All these kinds of organizational principles are ultimately arbitrary. That would be
Yeah.
a
And it's
fairly
just the
strong.
lens we put on it. Whatever
Yeah,
lens is going to give us a different conclusion or a different
yeah,
insight.
yeah. So that would be a fairly strong claim, and I don't even know if there are really people that defend such a strongly relativistic claim,
Yeah.
but the logic of arbitrariness does go in that direction, right? Like, where do you stop? Like, do you have a bedrock that is non-arbitrary, or do you get rid of all foundations? you know, it is actually pretty similar to what I was saying about, how do you deal with those regresses? Do you just stop asking for foundations? But if you stop asking for foundations, how do you avoid everything simply collapsing into arbitrariness?
Yeah. Sure. Or just, yeah.
Right.
Right. Well, and then also I'm just now thinking, I mean, it's really interesting to think about these things, but what I'm also thinking is like, human evolution hasn't changed. I mean, hasn't stopped, is what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
So certain traits, if we were to accept Darwinism and
Mm-hmm.
progress of human evolution, let's just say,
Mm-hmm.
um, if you go back in time and are trying to go back to establish foundations, well, certain things took even reason, perhaps, and the way we think and the way we organize ourselves, and then what that meant for the way we continue to evolve, and the
Mm-hmm.
technology and all of how that influences the way we understand the world, and then how much of that is actually inherited
Mm-hmm.
through evolution over time.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting thought. We haven't really touched on that either. It changes, right? I mean, I'm not a Cro-Magnon man, right? I mean, some people might say I am, but
Yeah, I mean, if I understand the question you're raising, maybe it could very succinctly be phrased as the following question. Let's take mathematics as an example of something that's often taken to have a foundation of certainty to it.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now the question is, let's grant that. Let's grant that there is a kind of certainty that is available to mathematical thinking.
Right.
Now the question is that certainty created? Is it invented or discovered?
Yes.
Right. In other words, did we invent a system that licenses its own certainty, or did we discover something
Yeah.
independent of us that has that structure of certainty to itself?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I don't know that that's a question that you're ever going to get much headwind with. It does seem like it's a fairly difficult question to answer. But the difference would be, if you think that mathematics is a particular way of thinking that has evolved with the changing structure of the mammalian brain or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
then you could say that, the quote unquote certainty that it licenses is actually just completely internal and is maybe just a chance adaptation that it has evolved to a structure that thinks in terms of rules that
Mm-hmm.
that license themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that mathematical systems always require axioms,
Mm-hmm.
um, and axioms themselves are not self-proving. So
Yeah.
it kind of depends on how you're defining the axioms. Actually, it's kind of interesting. There are three axioms to logic that Aristotle talks about in the Metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of excluded middle. The first one
Okay.
is just that A equals A at the same time in the same respect.
Yeah.
If you're talking about something, if you've got the number one, it equals the number one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Non-contradiction means something, a proposition can't both be true and not true
Mm-hmm.
at the same time in the same respect. So if you've got one, it's false that you've got not one,
Yeah.
right? Or if something is true, it can't possibly be false. It's one or
Yeah.
the other.
Right.
You can't have both. And then the third one is, but it is one or the other. It can't be neither of them.
Mm-hmm.
Every proposition is either true or false, and
Yeah.
there's nothing in between. That one's maybe a little bit more contentious, and it's easy to think of exceptions to that. But here's the thing about those axioms. If we take them as axioms for logic, then one problem with them is that they're not self-grounding. In other words, why do we accept that A equals A?
Yeah.
I mean, you could deny that. What Aristotle says is that you can't actually deny it, at least not in language, because in order to deny it, you first have to affirm it. You have to say, if I want to
Yeah.
say the law of identity is false, I have to say there is a thing, the law of
Yeah.
identity,
Right.
that is self-identical and is false.
Right.
But here's the thing, one way to refute it is simply not to use language.
Mm.
Right? And there, it seems clear that what licenses the law of identity is not that it's self-evident or nothing that's logically prior to it, simply it's the fact that the law of identity is required if we want to use language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's one thing about mathematics that might raise the question about whether it is actually ultimately certain, because it does require that we first posit rules. But why do
Mm-hmm.
you have to posit those rules?
Yeah. Yeah.
It may be the case that once you've posited the rules, internal to the rules, if you're
It makes
following
sense.
them,
Yeah.
that you get certainty or some kind of foundation, but
Yeah.
they don't ground themselves.
Yeah.
What
Right.
what grounds them is the fact that they license a system like mathematics or
Yeah.
language or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that's different about Aristotle, though. He does not claim that those are logical axioms. He claims
Mm.
they're metaphysical. He
Okay.
says reality itself follows the law of identity, follows the law of non-contradiction,
Mm.
right? And so that's how he tries to get out of the problem. Um, Essentially, it's just sort of out of the gate. Reality is set up in such a way that it follows these rules, and
Yeah.
then language also follows those rules, and that's one
Mm-hmm.
of the ways that language can actually
Mm-hmm.
connect with reality.
Mm-hmm.
But even there, excuse me, I, I suppose it's possible to raise the question, okay, maybe if anything exists at all, then you've got the law of identity on a metaphysical level.
Yeah.
But you don't have to affirm that anything necessarily exists, because it's possible to imagine that nothing ever existed,
Hmm.
right? In which case, it's similar to saying, how do you refute the law of identity? Don't use language.
Hmm.
But if you move the law of identity to a metaphysical level,
Hmm.
all reality is such that it coheres with the law of identity. You can say, yeah, but reality itself didn't have to be, right?
Hmm.
Um, that famous question is sometimes phrased as, why is there something instead of nothing?
Hmm.
It seems like it would be a lot less of a cost burden in a material or energistic sense or whatever for nothing ever to have come about.
Yeah, the pre-Socratics even talk about this. They're basically like one of them, I don't remember which one, is saying,
Hmm.
well, obviously there was being, and so there's no
Obviously,
way
what?
that non-being could come from being, so being had to always be there, and so then,
Mm.
you know, they
Yeah,
make
so that's typically the way that even today people answer that question. You have to start with the obvious fact that something exists.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then from that, you have to infer that it's impossible for nothing to exist.
Hmm.
And the way that I've heard it done most often these days is something like this. Either something exists or nothing exists.
Hmm.
It is the case that something exists because, look, we're having
Yeah,
experience, etc. Um, and then you have to say, so it's either possible that something exists or it's possible that nothing exists, but something exists. So therefore, it's impossible that nothing exists because since it's possible that something could exist even if nothing had existed, you still have
hmm,
possibility.
yeah,
You still have the field of potential for something to
yeah,
come about. So it's not nothing from that
right,
perspective. It's like the field of
yeah,
potential.
yes,
And the reason we know that you can't get rid of that is because the actual world does exist.
yes, right.
Yeah, so that's a typical way to get that. Although, I mean, I guess the question is, what is this pure field of possibility that doesn't have anything in it?
I know.
I mean, maybe it's the mind of God or something like that,
Yeah,
but it's a kind of spooky metaphysical claim.
yeah,
But it does, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the reasoning, right? Uh, if we say that it's possible that something could exist or nothing could exist, but something does exist, then for it to be possible that nothing exists, then possibility still has to exist,
yeah.
right?
Wow.
Um, in any case, I'm not sure if there's much else to extract from the outline
Yeah,
here.
this has been fun though, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. Well, we all are. Everybody in
Mhm,
modern life, postmodern life,
mhm,
life with kids.
mhm.